Welcome to the Astrolabe. It is a nice, brisk 90 degrees here in mid-March in South Central Texas. Make sure I have my Do Not Disturb on so my phone isn't buzzing the whole time. I checked the forecast, and over the next 2 weeks, the lowest temperature, the lowest high we are projected for is 75 degrees. Most of them are in the 80s, a couple of them are in the 90s. It does appear that our time of acceptable weather has ended, and we are back to the summer. Summer in Texas, I've learned, goes from, March to November, basically. So we'll enjoy the relatively dry heat that we have over the next couple of weeks, knowing that things are going to get much worse. Do me a favor and hit the like button as you're wandering your way in. I got an update from update from the wife. Oh, it didn't make it into Restream yet. Let me find it over here and read it. Peter update. You guys were very generous with the super chats yesterday to support Peter and his dental woes, and he's doing much better today. We were able to get him an antibiotic yesterday that looks like the swelling's on the way down, and he is happily laying out in the sun as he prefers to do. He spends almost all day just rolling around in the grass, laying in the sun outside. A little bit of discussion here about his name, where it came from. His name is Peter Pablo. Matt named me before we met. Yes, I got Pete just shortly before Amy and I met, and Pete probably was inspired by Pete Carroll, the head coach of the Seahawks at the time, and then Peter Pablo is his full name. Pablo was a backup option for his actual name, and then I thought it would be funny to say Peter Pablo, which was itself inspired by Petey Pablo, as is being discussed down here. So let's see some Trumps in the chat. We here at the King Pill channel, the Astrolabe show, we are deep respecters and appreciators of all of those who are suffering from Trump-related ultramassive penis syndrome, aka Trumps. And so if you too are sympathetic to the Trumps experiencers, the Trumps enjoyers, then drop an eggplant in the chat. Or if you're watching afterwards, drop it in the comment section. This is our way of fighting back against the algorithm and letting people know we do indeed want to see more Astrolabe. Please, algorithm, look upon us favorably. I know that I play all sorts of copyrighted stuff that gets the stream demonetized immediately, but you're still posting ads on it anyways, apparently, as the viewers tell me. I wouldn't know because I don't ever get ads on YouTube. But please, algorithm, look upon us fondly. We offer you our Trumps as a recognition of the investment in the Astrolabe endeavor. All right. Speaking of a little sports ball thing, I don't know what's going on right now with all these different brands that are just absolutely face planting. There was one just recently, and now that I'm thinking about it, I can't remember exactly what it was. But one of these brands that came out and did something that was just absolutely silly, and it would have been. Oh, I remember what it was. It was the Democratic congressmen and women at Trump's address that came out holding signs. It's like, if you're going to show up on the internet, especially if you're going to be some sort of controversial figure on the internet, the one thing you never want to do is hold up a sign. Hold up anything that would be conceived as a sign, possibly. Because the internet is very quick, and it didn't take more than 5 minutes for people to start memeing on them. Well, there's some other things that are happening here where I'm just like, who is occupying these like marketing and brand strategy departments at these organizations? Major League Baseball is the most recent victim of this experience. They have this new line of hats where they're combining like the stylized name of, or like the city, the name, like they're basically doing two logos. They're doing the normal logo, and then they're doing the, like, if we did a stylized logo representing the name of the team. Some of them are Texas or the state. Some of them are like Orioles. And they just overlay them like this. It looks shitty. It looks terrible. And in the case of the Texas Rangers, they literally made their hats spell Tetas. Which if you don't habla, just use your imagination for a moment. So then apparently they had to pull them, and the people who had purchased them, they were removed from the MLB online store, posted on eBay. They're now at $1,000. Show me them Tetas, yeah. Now, perhaps I'm being too harsh. Perhaps this is actually a counterintuitive, brilliant marketing strategy. If your sport is languishing or your organization is languishing, then perhaps this is the way to get yourself some headlines. Go have a major branding faux pas, and then have to do the token, like withdraw the thing and issue an apology or whatever. But mission accomplished. Are these people subscribing? You guys tell me what you think. I'm undecided. Is this like counterintuitive, no publicity is bad publicity, actually kind of brilliant subversive marketing campaigns? Or is this just incompetence has taken over? They don't have people employed who would recognize the potential, recognize the landmine coming. They need some more minesweepers. We need brand minesweepers. There's an industry we could create. You know what brand is perfect? This brand. Dude's posting their W says, kids today will not get to experience the great feeling of anticipation of game releases. I have, apparently, the Astrolabe audience is very well tuned because, I don't know, something like 15 of you guys maybe sent me this one. Every once in a while, one of those clips drops that my inbox just gets inundated. If you have stuff you want to see on the show here, by the way, you can DM me at RealKingPilled. Forgive me if we're not following each other, even if we are. I get an insane number of DMs every day, and if you're not following me, they get dumped into my other messages folder, which has been chock full of porn and crypto scams and all sorts of terrible stuff for a long time. I get probably 30 DMs a day that go into the spam folder. So it is hard to try to keep up with all the DMs. But if you have something you want to see included in the Astrolabe, then just shoot it over to me in the DMs on Twitter. This is one, every once in a while we get one of these that everybody hones in on and they all send it to me. So there's 963,000 views on this, and we're just going to go ahead and claim at least half of those from loyal Astrolabians. And now we're going to add to it by playing it here. Kids today will not get to experience the great feeling of anticipation of game releases.
Halo 3. Midnight tonight. We're going to set up the TV, my monitor. It's going to be amazing. We're going right now to the grocery store to get all the junk food we can think of. I can't wait. It's going to be amazing.
It will be amazing. We're going to finish the fight.
Finish the fight!
Yeah, hello, Nate.
Mountain Dew!
Through that, like you can call from that seed. Hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, it's a bit different.
Losers! Oh, man. What a time. We used to live in a society, man. It's coming back. We got another entry in the dudes are frickin' awesome category. This is from at Donetsk, Baron H on Twitter. This is, why is it nearly impossible to find recordings of sea songs sung as originally intended with a huge group of men? I swear this handycam recording has more presence and impact than half the stuff on Spotify. You guys ready? Strap in. Let's go.
Help me.
me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, bully down the shinbone now. I waltzed up to the angel in a way, hey, bully in the alley. I kicked on the door and walked right in, oh, bully down the shinbone now. So help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, way, bully in the alley. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, bully down the shinbone now. I walked up to the barroom counter, way, hey, bully in the alley. There I met with Greasy Annie, bully down the shinbone now. So help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, way, hey, bully in the alley. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, bully down the shinbone now. I bought a rum and I bought a gin, oh, way, hey, bully in the alley. I bought a wine, both white and red, oh, bully down the shinbone now. So help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, way, hey, bully in the alley. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, bully down the shinbone now. And when I've spent of all me tin, oh, way, hey, bully in the alley. Up to bed we both did creep, oh, bully down the shinbone now. So
We need to re-normalize getting together with your boys to sing sea shanties.
bully in the alley, help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, bully down the shinbone now. We're open tumble all night long, oh, way, hey, bully in the alley. Dawn did break, the cock did crow, oh, bully down the shinbone now. So help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, way, hey, bully in the alley. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, bully down the shinbone now. I left my gal to go a-sailing, way, hey, bully in the alley. I left myself to go a-whaling, bully down the shinbone now. So help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, way, hey, bully in the alley. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, bully down the shinbone now. So help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, way, hey, bully in the alley. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, bully down the shinbone now.
What a chord. Absolute kings, man. You know, got to give another shout out to my sports ball people out there. The only place in modern times that I regularly see this sort of dynamic, a bunch of people getting together and singing and chanting, is soccer matches, the supporters groups. They sit there. This is one of the most fun things about following soccer is going to a game. And especially if it's an away game and you've got a little, 200 or 300 people and the goal is to try to drown out the opposing team supporters and to try to get yourself on the broadcast. If you can hear the away supporters on the broadcast, that's like a big feather in your cap. So that's since I left college, the place that I've done the most getting together with a group of people and getting drunk and singing and chanting and such things is at soccer matches. So chalk another one in the column in favor of sports balling. So this one caught me by surprise. Gavin Newsom has started his new podcast. His first guest was Charlie Kirk, which was, okay, that's kind of interesting. And then Michael Savage, which is like, does anybody listen to Michael Savage anymore? Is Michael Savage's average listener has to be 78. And then this one was not what I expected at all. Gavin Newsom is actually today interviewing Steve Bannon. He is it's so transparent what he's doing, what Gavin Newsom is doing, and he's doing it well. Charlie Kirk is like, okay, all right, so, you know, he's got a little edge to him lately. But Steve Bannon, very interesting. I'm going to listen to this one. I didn't listen to the Colin Ross says he watched the episode with Kirk. How was it? I didn't listen to it. To me, it's very obvious what Gavin Newsom is doing. And I don't think that it's really going to be super relevant until we get much closer to the next election. But he's obviously the one with the greatest potential, damning with faint praise, among the current stable of potential candidates for the Democrats. But if he was going to try to maximize his candidacy, this is the way you would do it. Go have a conversation with Steve Bannon. What's interesting is that in doing this here, you can see who he is clearly just completely eschewing. Shout out Tom Woods. I know he loves that word. He is eschewing the radical side of the Democratic establishment. So this would be a Democratic operation of attempting to shift back to the center. Actually starting to treat some of the biggest boogeymen, the biggest bad guys from the Trump world, as people that you can sit down and have a conversation with. Now, I just don't really think there's much of a constituency for Gavin, and I don't see much happening to develop that. That's my read on it right now. Obviously, things can change. I never expected that we would be where we are today, but Whit says, I won't watch until he brings on Sam Hyde. Oh, man. That would be a career-defining moment for Gavin Newsom. And it would be good for Sam Hyde's career as well in some ways, but you know, more audience isn't always a good thing. I think Sam's doing very well for himself. But his performance in an interview like that, if he took it on the chin and just owned it, let Sam just drag him back and forth, then he could make himself look pretty good. He would have to navigate it well, but he's like a completely soulless power seeker, no principles or anything like that, which is what gives him the ability to actually do something like this. There isn't really anybody else. Can you imagine, I don't know, Pete Buttigieg doing this, or Josh Shapiro, Mark Kelly? None of them would be able to actually pull off something like this. I'll be very interested to see what Bannon's relationship, how he treats him, how he relates to him. That's definitely one that I'm going to watch. So hey, look, it's working. It's working. He's going to get another view that he wasn't getting. Not bad. Stray Buster says Sam put out another new video, by the way, and starting a new show. I saw that. I bookmarked it and haven't watched it yet, but I'm an avid follower of the things that Sam Hyde is doing. I think he's been someone worth watching, and he's making some very savvy moves. Okay, so had some funny little interactions at the White House today. It's been a few episodes. I haven't played any of our favorite vice president. So here it is. Here's him giving a little speech, welcoming I cannot remember how you pronounce it. The Irish Prime Minister has Taoiseach. Is that what it is? Taoiseach? Some kind of weird Irish name. But here's Vance. Check him out in the green tie. Looks pretty sharp.
Alliances and the great friendships between nations in the world. As I was telling the Taoiseach back in the library.
Taoiseach, okay. This is a sharp look. This green tie with the dark navy suit. He's looking good.
Earlier, Ush and I actually took a trip to Ireland in October of 2023, a bit on a lark, actually. Susan Collins, my dear friend from Maine, from the United States Senate, may remember that we were supposed to have a government shutdown. We didn't have a government shutdown, so Ush and I actually had a week where we could go anywhere, and we decided to go to Ireland. And I just say it's such a remarkable combination of incredible community, as we were talking about earlier, of beautiful landscape, but also a lot of interesting technological growth. And I think that one of the more robust areas for us to work on with our Irish friends in the years to come is going to be technology, and particularly artificial intelligence, as we, I think, really take the next stage in an important level of technological progress. Now, I want to give some acknowledgement of all the honored guests here. I can't, of course, call everybody out. I have to say thank you to Ashley and Brett Kavanaugh, Justice of the Supreme Court, and his wife for being here. Thank you to Mrs. Roberts for being here, Senator Sheehy, and of course the ambassador from Ireland, who I've met with before, but in a previous job. And let me just say before I introduce the Taoiseach that, you know, one of the things that we try to do with this breakfast is just remind people of the important bonds of friendship between the United States and Ireland. And, you know, I think it's a great opportunity to do that. It's also a really great opportunity for Usha to wear her pair of green pants. She's had these in the closet for years and finally gets to break them out. Perhaps the most honored guest, of course, except for the Taoiseach and his wife, is my dear friend from the United States Marine Corps, Colin Tiernan. He brought his brother, Joe. Good to see you, man. And here's the thing that Colin taught me when I was in the United States Senate. He taught me about sock diplomacy, about the importance of gifting socks to my fellow senators. Something that had, you know, I give, you know, Massachusetts socks to our friends from Massachusetts and Utah socks to our friend from Utah. So, Colin, in your honor, I've worn these shamrocks. When we meet later in the Oval Office to the Taoiseach, the president is a very big fan of conservative dress. And so if he notices these socks, you have to defend me in the Oval Office and say, this is an important part of cementing the Irish-American relationship. And that's the only reason I'm wearing these socks. But we're thrilled to have you. Thank you, and God bless you.
He's so freaking good at this, man. Our guy, which is our bond, is that we hate Britain. Yes, wouldn't it be interesting if they began carving off the Irish side of the relationship there and began pulling Ireland away from the UK and toward the United States? Wouldn't that be very interesting? Obviously, Ireland is a tax haven. I'm sure that's the one of the purposes of this meeting is Ireland's status as a tax haven. Negotiating various details of that relationship. But he gave a little foreshadowing there, and shout out to Autism Capital for putting together a couple of these clips that I can use. Actually, I guess this one came from the Rapid Response account, but Autism Capital highlighted it. And Trump, I don't know how coordinated this was, but this is great.
I have to speak of inflation. I love these socks. What's with these socks? President Trump. I'm trying to stay focused, but I'm very impressed with the VP's. I have to speak of
Look at him. What are those? I guess you can't really see it with the pause bar up there. Trump proves that what are those can happen in any generation. And then a couple more funny clips from Trump from this here. Here's him talking about Conor McGregor, which is very, very interesting.
Besides American Appreciation Month, you've named there. Who's your favorite Irish person?
Who's your favorite Irish person?
Oh, there's so many. Are you kidding me? Well, I do happen to like your fighter. He's got the best tattoos I've ever seen. I don't know if I'm a big but that.
Conor McGregor.
Boy, you have well, Conor's great, right? You know, talking about Conor, but you have a lot of great Irish fighters, actually, great fighters. I don't know what that is, but Ireland's always had a lot of good fighters. You know why? Because they're tough people, they're smart people, and they're passionate people, and they really have been over the years. So many. I think your father was a great fighter, right?
He was, sure did.
Wow, and yet look at you, you're so smooth and so.
He was a very good defensive boxer.
He was a really good.
He was a good boxer, yeah. He boxed for Ireland, and
yeah. That means you genetically, I'm not going to mess around.
Trump is so good at this. Whether I don't know if maybe he had a staffer ahead of time priming him with stuff like, here's things to touch on, like, for example, his dad was a boxer. Or maybe that just is a fact that made its way into the steel trap at some point in the past, and he pulled it out just the right time, and then he's self-effacing and very complimentary. It's an interesting dynamic. seeing the vibe that they have together, which is very different from, it was a very awkward kind of stilted vibe with Starmer there. And then it was very like kind of insincere and over the top with Macron, obviously hostile with Zelensky. And then here they're very relaxed, very chummy with each other, which is interesting. I'm pretty sure what is Trump's ethnic background? I can't remember if it was Irish or Scottish, German and Scottish descent. Okay. Yeah, interesting to get a little Conor McGregor mention in all that. And then, so recently, just within the last couple of days, Rosie O'Donnell posted a video talking about how she is now in Ireland and she's so happy. She left just before the inauguration. She's so happy. And so I don't know which reporter this is, but what an amazing question. This is so perfect.
Are you trying to
and my
confirm
second
Mr.
part
President?
question to this, Ireland is known for very happy, fun-loving people, great attitude, many in this room right now that I've met. Why in the world would you let Rosie O'Donnell move to Ireland? I think she's going to lower your happiness level.
That's true. Thank you. I like that question. Do you know you have Rosie O'Donnell? Do you know who she is? Do you know who she is?
Yeah.
You better off not. You're better off not knowing.
His face when the question comes in here. Where was that? Right here. Watch him. Watch Trump.
Move to Ireland.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Thank you. I like that.
I like that question. Only Rosie O'Donnell. And then this one. People are comparing this to Biden saying he ain't black. Well, apparently it's become a tradition now that the president gets to determine what your ethnicity is.
And Schumer is a Palestinian, as far as I'm concerned. You know, he's become a Palestinian. He used to be Jewish. He's not Jewish anymore. He's a Palestinian. Okay. And
oh, the man is such a treasure, such an absolute treasure to have around. He's not Jewish anymore. I decided he's not Jewish anymore. He's Palestinian. He doesn't give a fuck. Oh man, everything's computer. Little update on the Doge. Look at my Palestinian American slutty milk. Oh, Chuck Schumer's Jew card has been revoked. So this was something that we talked about maybe a month and a half ago, when we were looking at all these all the lawfare that was picking up. And one of the posters here on, let me see if I could find it again down here. One of these posters that I'd highlighted back then had said that there's a way, someone down here had mentioned it, that using injunction bonds is a way of preventing, well, there's this one here, preventing bringing frivolous temporary restraining orders. That's not the guy who had there was a guy who had a whole thread suggesting this, like saying there's an existing precedent for this, and I don't know where it is now. But so this is from Cremu. It says President Trump just sent a hugely important memo to all agency heads. It instructs them to inform courts filing injunctions against them that, per the law, plaintiffs have to post a security equal to the potential costs of the injunction to the federal government. So this is from the memo. It says, in requests for security under Rule 65C, agencies shall include, among other things, that A, Rule 65C mandates the court to require in all applicable cases, so there's a qualifier here, in all applicable cases, what defines applicable, that a movement for an injunction, posts security in an amount that the court considers proper, there's another qualification, to cover potential costs and damages to the enjoined or restrained party. So if you're filing for a temporary restraining order, essentially you need to post a bond that's equivalent to the potential damages for that restraining order being enforced, in the event that down the line it's determined that it was not proper to apply the restraining order. So if we're going to apply a temporary restraining order, which basically says freeze everything as it is so the court can weigh in, if at the end of that case, the court says, okay, so they rule in favor of the restrained party. Well, that restrained party has now experienced damages for whatever time everything has been frozen in place. So the plaintiff who is filing for the restraining order needs to post security. They need to post a bond against the possibility that the other party will experience damages. B says the security amount the agency is requesting is based on a reasoned assessment of the potential harm to the enjoined or restrained party. So, if the party being enjoined or restrained, which in this case would be the federal government, there needs to be a reasoned assessment of what the potential harm is. So if they're saying you need to freeze these funds, and while the court determines whether or not, or you need to force these funds to keep going out, freeze this spending while the court weighs in on it, and then it's determined that that money shouldn't have been spent, that the executive was in their right to pull back that spending. Well, now all that money's been spent and it can't be unspent. So the plaintiff needs to post a bond that, relative to the amount that it was going to cost the federal government, if the court ultimately rules in their favor, then that bond needs to be available for them to claim against those damages. And C, failure of the party that moved for a preliminary relief to comply with Rule 65C results in a denial or dissolution of the requested injunctive relief. So, the party that is filing for the temporary restraining order, if they don't provide that bond, then they need to be denied or have the injunctive relief dissolved. So if you, a plaintiff, demand the government make good on a payment of $2 billion that they were going to cancel, you must post $2 billion, just in case it's later found that the injunction was wrongful. This means the injunctions will stop. Activist groups are trying to get injunctions against the government to force massive payments to continue. They will lose many of these battles, but now the battles probably won't even take place in most cases because these securities are enormous and they won't make them. I think this is another demonstration that this Trump administration is very different from the first. Whereas in the first administration, injunctions worked to halt everything, now they're going to be a lot harder to get filed. Activists have to really fight this time. There's a link to the whole memo. Now, as Douglas Mackey points out, he says, I'm hoping they effectuate this. Injunction bonds are usually either waived by district court judges or set at embarrassingly low amounts. Hope the administration starts appealing these injunction bond decisions. And Cremu says, I hope so. It's clearly corrupt when they waive them or act like $1 is enough to cover $1 billion. So that, it's not necessarily a cure-all, but it gives more attack surface for the government to place pressure upon the judiciary. So if these district court judges are going to just plainly, obviously, the potential damages in this case, $2 billion, saying we're going to waive the bond or it's going to be a bond for $1 is just plainly corrupt. So it creates more attack surface against them that can be used for either escalating cases or getting to a more favorable court, or having Congress start applying impeachment pressure. Okay, so there's this big debate about the Massie versus Trump thing. So Massie says, he said he wouldn't vote for the continuing resolution, and then he did not. He was the only Republican who did not, and then there was one Democrat in the House who voted for it. Now it's gone to the Senate. They need 60 votes. Rand Paul has said he will not vote for it, and Adam Schiff has said he will not vote for it. And basically, they're not voting for it for opposite reasons. Rand Paul isn't voting for it because it continues. The stated reason is, well, this continues all of the spending that's been allocated for all of the things that Doge is cutting. And Adam Schiff is not voting for it because he says it will instantiate all of the things that Doge is doing. I'll just note here that if Rand Paul and Adam Schiff find themselves voting in the same way, that ought to raise some red flags. I mean, I guess it's not as simple as Rand Paul and Adam Schiff should never find themselves on the same side of a vote. I suppose you could come up with some reason why, but if Adam Schiff, of all people, doesn't want this bill to pass, then I'm struggling to see the rationale. Apart from just like the living in Ancapistan in your head wing of the libertarian strain that obviously Rand and Massie both represent, which is great. It's very nice to have those guys around. We appreciate them, everything that they've done. Rand has been kind of a disappointment relative to his father, but he's still been very good. He's done lots of very good stuff. He's put himself in danger, and I appreciate Rand. Love Massie. Absolutely adore Massie the person. And 95% of the time, I adore Massie the congressman. But occasionally, his dogmatism creates situations like this. And Aristophanes says, is a crash out of pro-Massie and pro-Trump people, which has plenty of overlap, really all that beneficial right now, compared to some one-on-one conversations between stakeholders who can actually come to an agreement. Now, the usual characters are trying to make this about that, really the reason why Trump is going after Massie is because AIPAC hates Massie and Trump just does the bidding of AIPAC. If you're still thinking that way, I don't know what to do with you, man. I really, really don't. If you think that's what's motivating Trump to go after Massie, you have lost the plot. Now, as Ashley Bolden here points out, she says Trump already said that they would push to primary someone who fought against the rollout of the agenda. So Trump is just following through on what he said. I hadn't even thought of this. I was like, that's actually a really good point. Trump is literally just doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And the Massie side of the argument would have to be that, Massie should get a carve-out for opposing Trump's agenda, and Trump should just accept that or something. No, this is actual politics. This isn't like, I don't know, writing a movie script or imagining having some little fantasy in your head about how in a perfectly engineered environment, everything would operate perfectly according to libertarian principles, the living in Incapistan in your head. No, this is actual power politics. And there is nothing beneficial about Massie being a stick in the mud about this sort of thing. Mark Metz says Massie should have fallen in line, then run for governor with Trump's endorsement where he can actually accomplish things. Right. That's one, and that would be one possibility. Now, I don't really think that Trump being anti-Massie is going to cost Massie his seat. So now, like, Massie has the cover. He can kind of do whatever he wants. And like I said yesterday, I do think that there's a legitimate shot that there's some kayfabe going on here. That because Massie is so safe, even with all of AIPAC pumping money into campaigns against him, I think he won his last election with like 75% of the vote. He's very safe. He's got one of the safest seats in Congress. So, perhaps this is some kayfabe happening. Ashley continues, it really wasn't about Massie, but about doing what you say you're going to do. So if Trump says, we're going to primary anyone who fights against the rollout of the agenda, this is one of the things that's on the agenda. Why? Because it's coming from the elected representative of the people. The president has said this is the agenda. So if you don't like the agenda, tough cookies. This is the agenda. There's no... I know this is a difficult thing to wrap your head around because you want to run all these scenarios in your head that says, oh, well, actually, what it is the administration has been tricked and they're trying to get this bill for this reason, but this is where the regime's going to come back in and get them and get their tendrils in there and they're going to continue all of this. And the administration is trying to do a tremendous number of things right now. They're balancing a whole bunch of different plates and they're trying to make radical changes to the regulatory regime, energy policy, tax policy, foreign policy, trade policy. And they're not just like doing a little stuff here and there. No, they're trying to radically change the entire global order. So in this case, if they want this extra budget room, if they want to maintain, if they need to buy as many votes as they can get, and that means that in this case here, yeah, we need to get the pork in there. The pork has to be in there to ensure we have the votes we get so that we can get this passed, so that it gives us the wiggle room that we need, that we've been expecting and planning on and budgeting for, to effectuate the back end of this initial disruption that we've caused. Then all of this like, oh, well, in the past, they just kicked the can down the road and nothing changes. Yeah, this isn't administrations of the past. This is a completely new administration that's clearly operating very differently than any other one has in the past. So just because in this particular case, they're like, we want this bill, and past administrations have said, we want this bill and we've made all these promises and then nothing ever follows through. So we have to stop this bill from going through because then maybe they won't fulfill their promises. You're stuck in politics of 10 years ago. You're the one who is stuck in politics of 10 years ago. This is now the politics of the strong executive who gets what he wants. He is the ultimate patron. He gets what he wants. This is not the time for loyalty squabbles. And if I'd told you 3 months ago that the administration was going to come in and they were just going to start blitzkrieging it like they have, and then they're going to orchestrate a collapse in the stock market so they can get lower interest rates, so they can term out some of their debt, so they can abolish the income tax, establish a sovereign wealth fund, set up a strategic Bitcoin reserve, all these different things all happening at the same time, and that the old regime would be just screeching and howling and looking for absolutely anything they can do to fracture that momentum, then you would have been like, oh yeah, so something's going to happen that's really going to tug at us and it's going to want to make us fight against each other and sort of pull back on all the momentum. Break down the cooperation and the communication and get people squabbling. Everyone within the broader Trump orbit firing at each other and squabbling and breaking down. You would have known it. You would have known that back then. I could have said that and been like, okay, you need to steel yourself and not get pulled apart and distracted on all these different little things. Not fall for the black pilling. And yet, here we are in the middle of it, and now everyone's falling apart. They're all, oh yeah, here we go. It's broken down now. AIPAC got him. He's just doing the will of Bibi. He's getting tricked. He doesn't know that now this just makes Doge a whole charade. Doge isn't serious. It's not actually happening. It was just a marketing campaign. Really? You think that Trump and Elon set themselves up as even more intense assassination targets and permanently instantiated themselves as enemies of the old regime who must be destroyed at all costs possible just because they wanted some little marketing campaign to kick off the administration and then they're just going to whatever, forget about it? You guys listening to yourselves? Continuing with Ashley's tweet, she says, the Massie crowd already knows from prior experience that primarying Massie would have little effect. So then why were the Massie people making a big deal about it and turning it into something more? Come on, if you were paying attention, you know it was coming. And you knew the CR would most likely pass and that a primary challenge has little meaning. There are examples of others who managed to be more diplomatic in their responses. It became a thing because of the faction of Massie supporters who are anti-Israel and mad about Trump over that. So they just used this as a proxy fight and made it more than it needed to be because it wasn't about the CR issue. This is exactly correct. And this is how the people who make their entire identity being anti-Israel become their own worst enemies. Based on everything that's happened over the last several months, it should be abundantly obvious that Trump is not just doing the bidding of Israel. In fact, the worst thing that could have happened to Bibi Netanyahu was Trump being elected. So if Trump says, this is a really important thing that I want to continue pursuing my agenda, then how do you possibly wrap your mind around this to where oh, this is what Israel wants actually? You people have lost the plot. And again, I don't know where Massie is on this. I think it's entirely plausible that this is a kayfabe operation. It's the Massie supporters who, as she correctly identifies here, they're just using this as a proxy fight. The CR issue doesn't really matter to them, actually. They might be trying to convince themselves that it does. But if it didn't, if the Massie story didn't have this backdrop, nobody would be giving a shit about the CR issue. Boniface option. says the same thing I do. The Trump-Massie thing is kayfabe. Trump has called for primarying him before, and it never works. AIPAC spent something like a few million per Jewish person in his district, only to lose spectacularly. Massie is untouchable. This is about sending a message to every other GOP congressman who is less secure than Massie, which is all of them. They don't ever want to see a Trump post with their name in it. Which means anybody who sees themselves as spurging out on behalf of Massie is literally just playing into the kayfabe. They're just falling for it. You're getting suckered. Now, a related point from Oilfield Rando, which I also think is good, he says you want people like Massie in there to constantly pull things rightward. Oh, you did this? Great. I want more. Give me more cuts. Give me national concealed carry. More. You always want those folks driving the party rightward, even if it causes friction. And I do think this is true. This is why I think, in spite of, like I said, there's probably 5% of the time that what Massie does or says irritates the hell out of me. But I think this is a point well taken. That it's actually, like, having him there, having the person who is never satisfied, always pushing for more, is good. But the rest of us and the chattering classes have to recognize the dynamic that's happening here. And just spiraling out and doom posting, being like, oh, everything was great for a few months, but it's all falling apart now, and we're back to business as usual. Like, if you feel inclined to post something like that, go write it in your diary and go for a walk. Because that's really what you need. 109 viewers. Oh, there's 110. We just made 110 again. Hit the like button, folks. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on over in Europe. So Marco Rubio came out and said that they'd signed a ceasefire with Ukraine, and now the pressure's on Russia. And I'm not really going to weigh in on everything. I know everyone has all their opinions on exactly what's happening. Oh, it's really bad this way or that way or whatever. I'm going to wait to see how things play out, because the way that these negotiations have been undertaken thus far is definitely a departure from these sorts of negotiations in the past. And the administration to this point has been like sympathetic, almost to the point of being openly defensive of Russia. So there's many things, many plates that are having to be balanced here, and I'm not just going to spurg out over every single headline. I'm going to wait to see how this pans out. There's lots of different things happening. There's this drone strike on this drone attack on Moscow. There's the tanker, the American tanker that was that was rammed by a Portuguese ship that was being captained by a Russian citizen, apparently. Very interesting story. I had some stuff on that, but I decided to pull it out and push it to tomorrow, because I got a hard out on this today. But so many different things happening. This was an interesting little one that popped up. Mark Carney suddenly shows up as comes out of nowhere. Nobody knows who he is, but he becomes the new Canadian Prime Minister. And then Canada announces that they're going to be issuing dollar-denominated bonds. I encourage you to go listen to Tom Luongo's market report from today. Go become a Patreon supporter. If you're not, go listen to what Tom Luongo is putting out. Just go give him the money. Go give him the money. It will be one of the best subscriptions that you have. Go listen to him. He had a very interesting take on what's happening with this. I'm going to let him explain it. I would just be literally repeating exactly what he said. So go listen to his market report from this morning, where he described what's happening. This is a very high-stakes move. This is effectively the Canada announcing that they're going to be issuing dollar-denominated bonds is effectively an act of war and needs to be treated as such. Now, the timing on this here is very interesting. This is from Mark Mitchell at Rasmussen. He says, bloodthirsty Redditors cheer Europe but have no idea how this will turn out. As a former submariner, I do. A French nuclear attack submarine surfaced in Halifax, Nova Scotia, after Trump threatens to annex Canada. This is March 10, so 2 days ago. Now, there's apparently a hub here for the nuclear submarines to resupply themselves. So it's possible that that's all they're doing, but I don't know. This is you're looking at the sequencing of all of these different events. You have Starmer and Macron and Zelensky come over to the White House. The Zelensky thing blows up. He goes back. Now they're doing the peace talks in Saudi Arabia, and Europe is announcing this new $800 billion defense initiative. We'll talk a little bit about that here in just a minute. Talking about building up this gigantic defensive force, and here you have this sudden a well-known banker suddenly gets installed as the prime minister in Canada, announces that they're going to be issuing dollar-denominated bonds, and a French nuclear submarine shows up right off the coast. Maybe it's just a coincidence. I don't know. This isn't my world. I'm sure there's some guys out there who might be able to speak to this more than I can, but it was an interesting thing popping up in the midst of all of the rest of this. Meanwhile, Slosher, $5. Speaking of Canada, here's Slosher. Mark Carney was the head central banker for Canada and then England. He wrote a book that is full of WEF talking points. Right. He is the definition of the enemy class. He is the absolute core at the heart of the European managerial, technocratic, banking-backed, organized crime network that has been running the world for a period of time. And is now their power is being threatened, and that's why they're installing a guy like him there. Some very strong words from Russia directed toward the UK. Again, in the midst of all of this, all these different little data points popping up, and here is when Russia decides to make this statement, which ought to validate a lot of the guys on our side who have been talking like this for a while. Russia's just straight out just making it explicit.
Well, in the last few minutes, there's been a further...
Oh, I won't make you listen to that on 2X.
Well, in the last few minutes, there's been a further statement from the Russian authorities accusing Britain of being the main instigator of the global conflict. In a statement, a Kremlin spokesman said that the British leadership sees a threat to its interests in the promotion of dialogue between the United States and Russia on resolving the Ukrainian conflict. London fears that this will lead to the failure of the British strategy of containing Moscow.
Okay, so the Kremlin spokesperson says the British leadership sees a threat to its interests in the promotion of dialogue between the United States and Russia on resolving the Ukrainian conflict. So the implication here is that there is Russia here is driving a split now between the US and the UK, identifying the UK as the primary source of all of this. But they go on.
As we can see, London today, just as it did on the eve of both world wars of the last century.
Just as it did on the eve of both world wars of the last century.
Acts as the main instigator of the global conflict.
At
the same time, the British themselves obviously are again counting on sitting it out on their island.
Oh, man. So the British are, just as they have done before, they are attempting to instigate a global conflict while they sit it out on their island. Woo!
The statement from Moscow goes on to say it is time to expose them and send a clear signal to the treacherous Albion and its elites. You will not succeed.
Treacherous Albion. They literally said treacherous Albion. Oh, man. I do believe that this is a happening. This is very much a happening. And the timing of it is not at all coincidental. Coming immediately on the heels of this announcement from the most appropriately named person in global politics, Ursula. She announced that 26 member states of Europe endorsed the EU president's $800 billion to $1 trillion US dollar defense spending plan.
To do so. And this is why we will propose to activate the national escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact, This will allow member states to significantly...
Oh, come on. Twitter's been kind of being a dick all day. I think they're probably still being attacked. Just as I was trying to put the show together today, the pages just wouldn't refresh. I can't access my
increase their
DMs.
defense expenditures without triggering the excessive deficit procedure. So if member states would increase their defense spending by 1.5% of GDP on average, this could create fiscal space of close to 650 billion euros over a period of 4 years.
Interesting. She's calling for the EU to increase its defense, the EU member states to increase their defense spending 1.5%. Who else has been doing that recently? Huh.
The second proposal will be a new instrument. It will provide 150 billion euros of loans to member states for defense investment. This is about basically spending better and spending together. And we're talking about pan-European capabilities domains like, for example, air and missile defense, the artillery systems, missiles and ammunition, drones and anti-drone systems, but also to address other needs from cyber to military mobility, for example. This will help member states to pool demand and to buy together. And of course, with this equipment, member states can massively step up their support to Ukraine. So immediate military equipment for Ukraine.
So the explicit purpose of this is to now equal the United States defense spending, effectively, to pool together and purchase equipment to be provided to Ukraine to fight against Russia. This is the explicit purpose of this. Now, where are they going to get this money? They are basically broke, in a huge financial crisis, and have been for a while now, that they're desperately trying to cover over. Well, where in the world are they possibly going to find $1 trillion a year throughout the EU for an organization that does not have taxing authority? Well, this popped up here today, again, from European Hillary Clinton, as Brent Taylor called it. Ursula von der Leyen tweets, Europe has all it needs to take the lead in the competitiveness race. This month, the EU Commission will unveil their EU Savings and Investment Union. We'll turn private savings into much-needed investment. How is that for some World Economic Forum speak? We'll turn private savings into much-needed investment. What the hell does that mean? And we'll work with our institutional partners to get it off the ground. So the EU does not have taxing authority. So what they're going to do is they're going to outsource it to their institutional partners to seize private savings. They're going to take money from your bank account, said Finance a Lot. The European Commission plans to take 10 trillion euros of citizen savings for EU defense. European Commission used 10 trillion euros of citizen savings for EU defense. The European Commission estimates the total level of unused savings of EU citizens at 10 trillion euros. And it intends to find ways to mobilize this money to finance its plans to militarize Europe and support the European military-industrial complex. According to a statement by European Commissioner for Financial Services and the Savings and Investment Union, Maria Luisa Albuquerque. Her name is Maria Luisa Albuquerque. Distributed by the EC Press Service, TSS reports. Do you want to get Bitcoin mooning? Because this is how you get Bitcoin mooning. This was their plan for us. Had Kamala Harris been elected, this would be deployed throughout the entire West. It's very interesting that we have the Trump administration goes over to Europe, massively horrifies and pisses them all off by telling them you need to start supporting your own, paying for your own defense within the context of NATO. And now the EU is saying, all right, we're going to pay for our own defense and we're going to finance this war ourselves. Outside the context of NATO, within the context of the EU, NATO's done. NATO's dead. The US, the Trump administration, has made it clear that that any sort of attempt to invoke Article 5, they're calling bullshit on it up front. So now the EU's like, okay, all right, I guess we're going to go it alone. Now, they're truly never going to go it alone. They've got way too much of a hard-on for the United States. They still see us as the colonies that got away. But these are the stakes of what's going on right now. This is the EU openly declaring we are going to seize our citizens' savings to fund our war that we are now going to explicitly engage in against Russia. This is also how you drive Russia and the United States together. So given this whole backdrop, the Trump administration's posture toward the UK ever since the inauguration, or ever since the election, honestly, and Russia coming out and straight up calling them treacherous Albion and saying they're the ones who are instigating all of this, which has been kind of an open secret for a while now. I'm going to hold off on my, freaking out and pearl clutching over Marco Rubio saying that we've negotiated a ceasefire with Ukraine and oh, they're so stupid. They think Russia is just going to belly up and, oh, yeah. It seems that there's much more going on right now than, and just taking each individual headline and extrapolating a whole world of what you think is happening it's getting really tiresome. Now I'm going to read you guys a very good post here from Millennial Woes. Posted March 5, so a week ago. Ursula's Predicament. Hit the like button, folks. We got 131 watching, 67 likes. Let's see if we can get to 109 before the end of the stream. People have an understanding of the term the elite. It means those who genuinely have power in the world and can influence events without being punished. The idea is that this is synonymous with the government, both its democratic and bureaucratic sections. However, since 2020, several things have become clear. There are power centers that are not part of any national government. The real elite is not confined to national governments nor accountable to any, and indeed is above them and controls them. It is an amorphous network of global governance institutions, hedge funds, investment firms, and NGOs. The West hasn't been democratic since 1945. Since then, the task has been to maintain the facade of democracy while acting against the will of every white polity, with the long-term goal of destroying every white polity. A European superstructure was created to expedite the process of taming national governments. However, the process was never solely reliant on the EEC/EU. The UN, the WF, the WHO, and the World Bank are also crucial. Notice that Brexit did not detame Britain. The middle managers who manage Britain remained completely under the control of globalist powers. This taming of national governments includes denying them military strength in favor of protection from America. This prevented them from ever rivaling America and also pushed them towards a feminine worldview in which daddy looks after everything. So the kids never need to grow up and are actually free to resort to a sort of babyhood. To revert to a sort of babyhood. This process has rendered national government so subservient, indirectly to America and directly to the globalist governance structure. Very important point here. Indirectly to America and directly to the globalist governance structure, because America, as a polity, has been propped up to appear as if it is the dominant power. When in reality, it's just like a shield to protect the actual power structure behind it. This process has rendered national governments so subservient that they are now unable to honestly respond to events, while the idea of serving their polities has become completely alien to them, to such an extent that when Keir Starmer was offered the easy win of choosing Westminster over Davos, he chose Davos. That's a hell of a clip. He says that that Westminster is just like too noisy. It's too rowdy. At this point, national governments are bought and sold talking shops full of people who have long since lost any ability to help their societies. Indeed, if you had that goal and any brain to pursue it, no party would allow you to stand for election. Every major political party has been subverted. Fledgling parties are either subverted or crushed in embryo. Occasionally, decoy parties are created, such as Reform UK, to keep the illusion going. To underline, both elected politicians and civil servants serve the elite, not their own nations. I think it's almost useful to start thinking of globalism as something kind of like a global ethnicity. These people are diverging more and more from their native populations, the characteristics of the population that brought them forth, and they're forming almost like this distributed ethnicity that exists in all of these different institutions. They all think the same way. They come from a similar culture. They have a similar language. They have a similar set of just presumed shared values that are incidental to whatever values may be shared by the actual populations they stand to represent. They're almost a separate ethnicity unto themselves that is multiracial and multinational. It is possible for an individual, Elon Musk, or a group to join the elite by sheer force of wealth. You can literally buy your way in, but you need to be massively wealthy, certainly a billionaire. You might have to hide your true views for a while before you get there, but eventually you will have amassed enough power that you can defy the elite's consensus and then, at least in part, reshape it. Since technology has advanced to a point where the elite feel they no longer need to fear ordinary people, they have become ambivalent to their desires, needs, and complaints. At worst, they see the European public as a disease to be eradicated. At best, they see it as an unlovable thing that has to be managed, largely stupid and potentially violent or destructive. That their own policies have made the public so potentially destructive is of no concern to them. Their only concern is maintaining the status quo no matter what. When Ursula von der Leyen announces that European countries will increase their military strength, it is not so that they can defend their own interests and benefit their peoples, but so that they can fight the wars that the elite want. The only two nations that were ever powerful enough to wrest themselves free of the globalist elite were Russia and America. In the case of America, this didn't matter because it was so thoroughly corrupted and tamed by the Zionist lobby. Eventually, the American public got sufficiently angry to vote in Donald Trump in 2016, but the Zionist lobby kept him neutered. In 2020, he was denied re-election, almost certainly by vote rigging, and we had 4 years of unbridled insanity with Joe Biden. But by the time the 2024 election came along, the Zionist lobby had developed a concern, October 7th and rising anti-Zionism in U.S. academia, which meant it had to revise its priorities. This created discord between it and the rest of the Western elite. It was now in Zionist interest to have a strong, self-sufficient America, not a dysfunctional, woke, globalized America. Trump was allowed to become president again, but with certain conditions attached. Here's where I diverge from him. It was not the Zionist lobby that determined this pivot. Because really, the Zionist lobby and the globalist elite are distinct. I think this is an important thing to notice. These are distinct factions with a lot of overlap, but they are not the same thing. They mutually support one another because they can help each other get their shared ends, but they are not the same thing. And there are aspects of the Zionist lobby that decided to back Trump, but this was not the Zionist lobby per se deciding to throw its support behind Trump. The determining faction was a rising, distinctly waspy elite within the United States. And a collection of really what, again, I think we're going through this period of ethnogenesis. And so there is a faction that's emerging that is it's not really waspy, it's not really Zionist, it's not globalist, it's kind of just American. There's a spirit on the rise. If this is indeed what has happened, then the countries of Europe are left in a very strange position. They are encumbered with a leadership cadre, people like Ursula von der Leyen, that was foisted on them by foreign globalist powers. But that cadre has now been cast adrift by those powers, at least by many of them. As a result, von der Leyen finds herself compelled to serve an obsolete agenda in order to do so, must appeal to a European public that said agenda has compelled her to abuse for decades. The agenda itself is now rudderless. Nobody has any idea what it will lead to, if anything, but there is no alternative agenda. Again, I don't think that this is the globalist powers have not abandoned Europe. They're actually doubling down on it now. It's become clear that they need to change course based on the trajectory and the competence and the moves that have already been made by Trump and his broad popularity. So there's two operations that are happening now. There's do whatever you can to create chaos and undermine Trump's popularity and sow division among the different factions that make up the MAGA coalition and try to slow it down while pivoting to using Canada. This is the thing. Go listen to Tom Luongo's thing about Mark Carney and his USD bonds. They're trying to set up Canada as a new outpost to subvert the United States explicitly. This is a European policy now. I think the odds are increasing very quickly that there's going to be some sort of directly hostile conflict between the United States and Canada that's not being precipitated by Canadians. It's defensive by Americans. It's not precipitated by Canadians. They are pawns. This is what happens when you are a colony of European powers. The actual residents of the land don't matter. The European leadership class is the most psychotic group of psychopathic morons on the planet. And they're not going to let America reach its destiny without a huge fight. And they're weaponizing Canada and Mexico toward that end, while they're also, they are pot committed. They've got all these war bonds. They've got all these promises to major financial investors and bankers that they need to make good on, that are going to require them to continue prosecuting this war against Russia. And they're not going to get American support for it. Which is, it seems that they don't think that they're going to get American support for it. All these people who are like, oh, the U.S. is just going to get suckered right in and continue sponsoring this war against Russia. Europe sure doesn't seem to think that's the case. They're going full-blown contingency plan now. In fact, this course of action will end up benefiting America and its Zionist lobby. Again, yeah, I think I fundamentally disagree with his perception of the Zionist lobby and Trump's relationship to it, and this should be very obvious to anyone at this point. Young European men will go to war and get massacred. As a result, their country's economies will be decimated, leaving America as the only functional Western country. The absent young men will be replaced by virile young Africans who will miscegenate with the women and destroy these countries forever. Yes. The more that Europe as an entity tries to exist and throws itself against the Russians, the more this is going to become a reality. The future of Europe is very bleak. The EU isn't long for this world. The EU is going to fracture and collapse. But a lot of people are going to die in the midst of all of this because these fucking people will not relent. They will not let up. They're demonic. The only thing that can happen is they have to be forcibly put down. The future of Europe looks much more like Africa than it does like Europe, for a variety of reasons. That might be the intention behind those elites who are pushing for European war with Russia. Essentially, what has been done to Ukraine, destroying its young male population, will now be done to all Western European countries. However, I don't think that is going to happen. In the 80 years that the countries of Western Europe have lived under American domination, they have been cosseted from practical realities and have become tragically weak militarily. With Trump's permission, they could now begin rebuilding their militaries, but it would be many years before they'd be in a position to take on Russia. Until then, such a war is completely unwinnable for them. The only reason they're able to even entertain such an insane project is that America has shielded them for so long, both from geopolitical realities and the common sense theory of their own polities. And in this pampered existence, they've come to believe the fanciful notion that ideas are power. The pragmatist knows that only power is power, and they don't have it. But anyone can become a pragmatist at any time, especially when it is in their electoral interest to do so. Enter Giorgia Meloni, who has poured cold water on their dream of war with Russia by proudly stating that Italian soldiers will not be taking part. Just one country doing this is enough to set an example for all the others. In this day and age, I cannot see Italy being demonized for its cowardly refusal to fight in a war whose point eludes most ordinary people. Instead, I think the people of Britain, Norway, Germany, Denmark, etc. will think, if the Italians aren't walking into the meat grinder, why should we? And so we come back to the hapless figure of Ursula von der Leyen. Her position is impossible. She is in no way fighting for the interests of the people she ostensibly serves, Europeans, and while this may be tenable during periods of prosperity, Western Europe is not in such a period, so the detachment of its leadership cadre is extremely offensive. It is also tenable to ignore your people's interests when you're not asking them to make any great sacrifices, but she is now asking them to risk the lives and limbs of their young men. In the meantime, conditions on the ground in every Western country, all the Western countries that people like her used to consider their canvas, are worsening by the month and turning ever more people against the agenda, which, without a utopian vision, let alone any time frame or concrete goals, seems nothing other than suicidal. At the supranational level, we have a globalist cadre which has become unfit for purpose and hereon can only slowly realize its obsolescence. But there is another factor. Each European country is still led by a national government that was tamed and enslaved to said cadre. The cadre cut adrift may now lose energy, but each government cut adrift from the cadre will now find itself equally clueless. All they will know is the status quo and a demented need to maintain it, no matter how insane that would be. A government can ignore its public's complaints as long as it has them under control. The problem is that the more it ignores complaints, the more its legitimacy erodes, and thereby its authority, and thereby its control. It will counter this by using heavy-handed methods to make examples of people and suppress dissent, but these methods will only work short-term, as they serve to advertise its illegitimacy, since it only needs to suppress dissent because it is neglecting real and increasingly tangible problems. The government's hope is to make the suppression brutal enough that dissenters will be deterred, but subtle enough that the public will not be disturbed. However, even if it manages this balance, its position is a losing one, since the problems the dissenters are complaining about continue to grow, regardless of the suppression. Indeed, because of it. The national governments are in the position of middle managers who have been given an impossible brief by their superiors, the European leadership cadre. But said cadre is in the position of a spoilt star pupil who has just been told by her teacher to do something hellish. Communication between these different levels seems to have broken down, because each level is demanding something impossible from the level below it. We are heading into extremely interesting times. I don't see how the EU can maintain itself for more than another year or two before the more they keep doubling down on all this silliness, the more their men start dying. They actually start sending mass numbers of European men, French men, German men, English men, Danish men, Swedish men, Norwegian men. The less enthused the average European is going to be with their leadership class, the shakier their leadership class is going to be. And it's very much in the United States' interest to peel off each of these countries from the primary instigators of all of this strife. Which is why maintaining this is just power politics, guys. There's going to be soft power meddling in European politics by the Trump administration, and I fully endorse it. Because that's the only way that this is the only way that we're going to save European lives. Is if the power brokers who are operating with deep-pocketed, very powerful backers are themselves disempowered by an equally powerful or more powerful group of backers. So when Elon is very pro-AFD, he's very anti-Starmer. They're obviously very close with Maloney. All of these sorts of operations, it's very much in the United States' influence to fracture the European Union and force it to break down. It is very obviously, abundantly obviously, the greatest force for evil on the planet today. They need to be removed from power, come hell or high water, for the sake of the European people. I don't know if the European people have it in them to overthrow their own power structures. I don't know if they recognize what time it is. I don't know if they have the will. I don't know if they have the institutional capacity or the ability to generate institutional capacity to do it. All the memes about like liberating the euros, very well may have to happen. Mongo says next to expedite immigration for Europeans. Yeah, absolutely. Bring them on in. You guys are just going to have to assimilate. All of you Euros who immigrate to the United States, you're going to have to assimilate. I know we're a bunch of mouth-breathing yokels. We're the mouth-breathing yokels that are going to provide you the opportunity to not be conscripted and bankrupted in your own country. So do with that what you will. It looks like King Salmonfish is here in the chat, and he must have blocked me because his comments aren't showing up at all. Noah says, Matt, did you watch Tom Luongo's market report from this morning? Yes, I did. Very strongly recommended. I was mentioning that just a few minutes ago. Go subscribe to Tom Luongo's Patreon and watch his market report. Yeah, I can't see Salmonfish in here. So, yeah, I don't know. Just ignore him. $5 super chat from Melon says, plan status. Trusted. That's right. This is the spirit I like to see. Okay, so while all that's happening in Europe, here's what's going on back home. I told you guys I would play this video for you after yesterday. I played the first part from this guy, Stephen Lubka. He says, the only thing which matters for markets right now is the Trump administration's policy. What do we know and what is their plan? How long are they willing to tolerate the stock market going down? Is there a timeline where they step in to support it? I explore all of that here. So let us listen to him. He's got some good thoughts, and I want to get a lot of repetition on some of these ideas. I've got a couple more things right after this, just to I'm trying to seed this into the zeitgeist, get people recognizing that it now is not the time to get pulled away by all these different distractions. Stay focused, because this is going to be the time of the greatest turmoil and strife. We've been calling it for months now. That like March to May is going to be the time of the greatest turmoil and strife. And if the administration successfully navigates their way through this, very good things are going to start happening after that. And when those very good things begin to happen, and sentiment follows with them, as we begin to, it begins to seem like we're actually coming out of this dark tunnel, that's going to have a profound effect on all of the other so-called Western countries as well.
All right. So we are living in Trump's market right now. Everything that's going on, performance of asset classes, it's just all downstream of what's coming out of the Trump administration. Obviously, that has been a weight on markets. But the question is it just pure chaos? Is there anything good here? Is there a strategy whatsoever? And I think most of all, what do we actually know? Like, how can we? Are we just waiting for the next tweet from Donald Trump, or is there other data points that are actually actionable or can help people at least make sense of what's going on? So purpose of this video is to talk about that. Let's start with what do we know? What do we know? We know that multiple members, senior economic members of the Trump administration.
Armchair Contrarian says, who is this? I missed the name. This is Stephen Lubka. Lubka. I don't know exactly how he pronounces it, but he's from Swan, the Bitcoin company.
So most of what I'm going to share comes out of Scott Bessent, it comes out of Trump himself, or it comes out of Lutnick. These are kind of the three main parties that communicate the administration's economic and financial goals. So what do we know? They want the 10-year down. This is the kind of longer bond interest rate. So when we're looking at what is the yield, what is the interest rate that the U.S. pays on to kind of roll over some of its debt in 2025. There's quite a lot of debt that needs to be rolled or refinanced in 2025. So they're looking, I would imagine, one of the reasons they want this is they want to lower the interest payments the U.S. is making. So it affects that. It also affects mortgage rates. So the housing market has been totally frozen. And unlike the stock market, the housing market is something most Americans actually participate in. It's been in a bad spot. Houses are very expensive. Prices haven't been able to decrease, and mortgage rates have been extremely high. So we've seen those mortgage rates come down. I think they want to see that come down further. So what do we know? We know they want the 10-year down. This has been direct out of many people's mouths. Now, we also have some other information. Multiple members of the administration and multiple times, they have basically told us they don't care about Q1. They also kind of don't care. They're not watching the stock market right now. The Q1 comment is important. They're saying, like, Q1's off the table. Q1's going to have problems. They've called it Biden's economy. Obviously, there's some truth to that. There are kind of there were problems coming over, frozen housing market, cooling jobs market. However, obviously the stock market moves are from the Trump administration. But they're writing it off. They're writing off Q1. And we have recently, as of yesterday, we have had some comments come out of the administration basically saying Q2 is going to be good. There's going to be tax cuts in Q2. So it looks like what the administration is doing is they're framing Q1 as kind of the sacrificial quarter. We're going to have the pain then. Q2 is when they're going to roll out corporate tax cuts, general tax cuts, and potentially, and I would expect, other policies and other actions to start to stimulate or increase the market. Now, this is consistent with what Scott Bessent said on an interview, where he was asked if there's a Trump put. What is a Trump put? A Trump put is kind of a market's term for if there's a level that if the market drops so much that Trump's going to come save it. And he said, no, there is not a Trump put, which obviously had markets very nervous, and they've fallen since. But what he said after that is he said, there is a Trump call. There's a Trump call option. And what they are communicating to the market is that it's going to be painful in Q1, and then they are really stepping in to see that go higher. Now, of course, things could not work. This could not happen. Like we're reading the tea leaves here, but I think it's important for people to know even what they're saying and what we do know from their communicated goals. So, and so this Q2 theme, this is echoed yesterday, and it fits this kind of theme of a no Trump put, but a Trump call.
Pleb Enforcement on Twitter says, have you talked bit bonds yet? Just arrived. No, we're going to be talking bit bonds here shortly after this video.
So they're letting the market go down. This is painful. Why are they willing to tolerate this much pain? Clearly because they see the goal of getting that 10-year down as more important. And like I said, this is something that plays into U.S. debt burden. It plays into fixing the housing market. And it plays into maybe some other strategies. So there's this debate going on saying, is this just chaos? Is he just being erratic? Is it just chaos? Is there no theme whatsoever here? Or is there a strategy? I think for better or worse, successful or unsuccessful, correct or incorrect, there is a strategy. And so I don't think it's helpful for people to view what's happening through this lens of just like, flailing and erraticness. What it looks like they're trying to do, and they're threading the needle here. This is not an easy thing to do. It could easily fail, and you could easily argue that this is not the right strategy to take. But they want to get those rates down. Once those rates down, they can navigate kind of renegotiating, rolling, refinancing. I think there's $7 to $9 trillion of U.S. debt that need to be refinanced in 2025. They can get that done at much lower interest rates. Like if it was done a couple months ago, it would have had to all be done at 4.5%, which is prohibitive. It's a problem for the U.S. and would be a problem for many nations. But what you can do after that, there's this interesting concept, and this plays into some of the geopolitical discussions that you've seen going on. This concept of defense spending, security. The U.S. has provided security resources to all of its allies for a long time, and it has done so largely at cost to the U.S. And so there's this idea that I think started to emerge. There may have been some commentary by the administration, but it's wanting to see those nations kind of support the U.S. and the cost of that security umbrella. So if you can get the rates down and you can get these yields down, you can then essentially, if you're Trump, you can issue these very long-term treasury bonds. They could be 50 years, they could be 100 years, whatever, that's for them to decide. But you could do a very long-term instrument that would be at a low interest rate to you. And you could tell your allies saying, hey, okay, we will continue protecting, we'll continue spending all this money on military, we will continue sending all of these resources out to, secure our allies' borders, but you need to buy X% of your GDP in these long-term US bonds. And if those can be issued at a very low interest rate, this is kind of the holy grail for reducing the US's interest expense. Now, is this going to happen? Is he doing this? Are they able to successfully do this? None of us know, right? But this is a way I could look at what's happening through a lens of strategy that is, I think, defined by comments made by the administration. I think it's reasonable to believe this is on their mind. Again, does it happen? Or even, can you successfully execute it without crashing the stock market too much? We're going to find out. But I think this is like a useful lens to look at what they're trying to do. They're working within a short window to renegotiate and restructure the interest obligations of the United States. This is what's on their mind. This is what you can gain from their comments.
To be clear, part of the reason why they have to press so hard on this is because of the actions that Janet Yellen took on her way out. She basically created this scenario to bog them down, where they've got a bunch of this short-term debt that's going to roll over that they have to deal with. And they don't want to replace it with new debt with rates as high as they are right now. This is Janet Yellen fighting back against Jerome Powell on behalf of her European masters. Janet Yellen should be sent to prison for what she did as Treasury Secretary. So that's part of the reason why they're stuck with having to navigate this and why all of this pain is happening. Now it kind of rings a little hollow because every president wants to say, "Oh, well, this is the previous president's economy that I'm dealing with." So in this case, it genuinely is. And as Armchair Contrarian points out here, they've also clearly stated that they want private spending and growth to replace government spending and growth. I think they're trying to create a real economy. Yes, exactly. So what's happening right here is the stock market is wildly overvalued because of all of this government spending that's been just flooded into the market. So they're saying, we're going to pull back all of this spending. We want to pull back all of that spending. We want to refinance our debt. We want to completely change our debt structure. And we want all of these overinflated assets. We're going to let all of this capital drain out of that so that it can be reallocated to something more sustainable to replace the government spending that's being pulled out.
And this is, I think, how to look at their goals. As investors, as people that participate in markets, what's the takeaway? The takeaway is don't expect anybody to come save the market in Q1. But also, don't be too afraid, I think. Obviously, things could go wrong and there's uncertainties, but from the messaging that's being put out, I think you're looking at a scenario where in Q2, there's a lot of supportive actions that come in. And when I look at this market pullback, all I see fears, I see uncertainty. I don't see an actual economy that is deteriorating massively, nor do I see this move as proportionate with like, oh, we have tariffs now, will GDP be slightly lower? That's not what we're seeing. We're seeing panic. We're seeing the market front-running fears. We're seeing the market throw a tantrum at this political uncertainty, and frankly, at not being supported with fiscal spending, not being supported with words, with comments, and it's throwing a tantrum. Markets often do this. They effectively play this game of chicken with policy because market participants or the market in aggregate has realized that if you just sell off enough, you might be able to get what you want. But so I think there's this really volatile period right now, and it's affecting sophisticated participants. I've talked to people that run investment funds. I've talked to people that run, strategies. A lot of these people are selling at a material drawdown. Is that the right move? Well, if you're just trying to manage kind of short-term risk and you're going to aggressively buy back in, maybe. But also, it's hard to imagine this isn't being sold at you should have sold 2 weeks ago, right? So this is affecting everybody, and it's something where I think late sellers can get kind of rug pulled here, because I do think there's the second wave coming to this story where you're going to see a ton of supportive action come in, and this needs to happen, right? This needs to happen because Trump is not going to be able to successfully navigate this administration if the stock market goes down for the next 6 to 8 months, it'll be wildly unpopular and it'll make everything else he's trying to do very difficult. So I think the way to think of this is they have a narrow window. This will be confined to a couple months, at which point they need to reverse course. So I wanted to put this together so you can have kind of a lens to think of this through, and bring a little bit of kind of coherence to what could be a very chaotic and volatile environment. All right. See you guys.
I think he lays it out very well. Politically Catholic says, Matt, if the EU buys these bonds, then they will be effectively kneecapped militarily. It would be enough of a proof to Russia that they can safely back off without worrying about an invasion. Europe can either buy our bonds, buying our security guarantee, and show Russia that they're not threats, or build their military-industrial complexes up and risk World War III without the U.S. coming to save them. They can't afford to do both. And I think that a thing to watch here is we've only seen it teased, these super long-term bonds, 50, 100-year bonds, have only just been kind of teased a little bit. I can't remember if Scott Bessent said something about it or if it's just been people who are in the Trump orbit, economic advisors, rumors coming out about it. But assuming that this is an approach that they're going to take, then the countries, looking for the countries that actually agreed to start purchasing these bonds, the Eurozone countries, would be, like, I'd imagine that Italy probably is going to. Hungary may. Those will be looking for those countries that decide that actually start purchasing these bonds from the U.S., assuming that they actually offer them. I think that would be a very strong signal that this is like a departure from the commitment to the EU, and it'll be one of the many things that will ultimately presage the downfall of the EU, which I expect. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens within Trump's term here, some point within the next 4 years. I just don't see mathematically, culturally, socially, politically how they can sustain it. A comment here from Bumbadum said, to every Gen Xer and Boomer whining about the stock market, keep in mind, because there's been I've seen a number of good posters, a number of our guys who are now like, oh, voting for Trump was a mistake. I had all my wealth wiped out, and I thought it was going to be bad, but I never thought it was going to be this bad. Says, every Gen Xer and Boomer whining about the stock market, keep in mind the alternative ran on taxing unrealized capital gains. This is what the alternative power structure is out there. It's the EU seizing its citizens' savings to fund military development and taxing unrealized capital gains. This is the most European, like modern European technocratic policy suggestion that I've ever seen. The most anti-American policy ever proposed. So your choice was a possibly small stock market dip, lose some money. And if you were listening to the guys in our corner, you hopefully got a lot of your money out or reallocated appropriately, or you're just willing to ride the dip. So your choice was possibly a small stock market dip or being taxed on money you don't have, then withdrawing that money, taxed on the withdrawal to pay for the tax on money you don't have. What you're experiencing now is the obvious better result. Like, those of you out there, you know who you are. If you're doom posting about all of this, Trump doesn't know what he's doing, he's so chaotic, you're literally just selling the propaganda of your enemies. Here's an interesting take, continuing to reinforce this, from the internet's most reliable news source. Headline here is, egg prices plunge nearly $2, now lower than when Trump took office. For the retards in the back, Trump is trying to crash the stock market at least 20%, causing a flight into treasuries. This will cause the Fed to slash interest rates so he can refinance the debt to near 0% and cause a deflationary spiral, which will lower the cost of everything. And I'll add that right now, what I'm sure some of this stock market crash is from the Europores who are trying to contribute to this because they want to slam Trump with a bunch of negative headlines about the stock market and get the plebs all riled up about it. At the same time, Trump's trying to get a lot of this malevolent foreign investment out of the country, so he's like, word, I'll take it. The really insidious thing is, again, the Canadians announcing dollar-denominated bonds that are probably going to be selling them under the what the Fed is trying to do. So the Fed is trying to roll over people into treasuries, and Mark Carney is now coming in and trying to undercut that. He also intends to use tariffs as an incentive for companies to build in the U.S. to avoid having to pay them. The tariffs and the resulting global trade war will also force American farmers to sell more of their goods in the U.S. due to retaliatory trade measures by other countries, which will directly lower the price of groceries in the U.S. More than 94% of all stock is owned by just 8% of the U.S. population. Trump is literally taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor. This is why Trump is playing the game of hokey pokey with tariffs. One day he has 25% tariffs on Mexico and the next he doesn't. This is to cause extreme volatility in the markets and a desperate need and demand to flee towards Treasury bonds, which are much more stable, but offer much lower potential return. This is also why eggs are cheaper now than they were under Joe Biden. This is a particularly good point here, I think. I've seen a lot of criticism about Trump for being so sporadic with this. Tariffs are on, no, they're off. No, they're on, no, they're off. No, they're on, no, they're off. But actually, right now, that volatility is a feature, not a bug. And then another one here from Gordo Stevens on Twitter. Haven't seen it before, but this is a very good post. Trump's economic play for the remainder of 2025, in my opinion. First, use tariff threats to correct U.S. equity markets, which increases demand for U.S. government bonds and drives down yields. Second, refinance $7 trillion. I keep hearing $7 trillion and $9 trillion, somewhere in that vicinity. You cannot comprehend the difference between $7 trillion and $9 trillion, so don't trouble your silly little head about it. Refinance $7 trillion in maturing bonds at lower rates. 3, lower bond yields result in a devalued dollar, therefore giving a boost to exports. So lower bond yields, devalue dollar, which means it's easier for Americans to export to other countries because it's cheaper for the other countries to buy them because the dollar is weaker. Boomers panic as equity markets trend downward and start unloading their investment properties. More houses on the market results in lower prices. I have a story on this. The Fed has been paying a bunch of mortgages to keep them out of foreclosure. This is going to be another interesting lever to see how they decide to manage this, but I'll talk about that in the show tomorrow. 6, the Fed cuts interest rates as GDP growth and housing prices trend downward. Tom Luongo has been banging the table that Powell is going to be cutting rates for sure coming up here shortly, and I think he makes a good case. 7, lower rates and prices result in a suddenly affordable housing market. Number 8, inflation falls below 2% as a result of cuts to government spending and a temporary decline in aggregate demand. By 2026 midterms, we're going to have non-existent inflation, an affordable housing market, and booming exports. Now, I'll say that I think we're probably still going to have inflation. We're just going to have wage inflation that goes with it. So people are like waiting for prices to come down. I don't think that prices are going to appreciably come down, generally speaking. I think if anything, they're going to hold static or start going up, but income is going to increase proportionally. So we'll settle into a new normal with what would be considered to be elevated prices, but on a relative basis, they're going to be much more affordable. The housing market is another one that I think I don't see the housing market actually going down from here for a number of reasons. I'll get into that tomorrow. I think it's much more likely that if anything, the housing market just kind of treads water, depending on how they deploy these different tools at their disposal. Remember the HELOC in bonds, the HELOC that is paid out in the government HELOC, where the bonds are taken against the equity in the home. That would basically, for those kinds of houses, it's going to lock in their value or a floor on their value. So they're not going to come down a lot. If you get a bunch of houses flooding the market, there's a lot of buyers out there that are ready to go and buy. And so I don't see the houses flooding the market, and I don't see something happening. I guess I'm getting ahead of myself for tomorrow, but I don't really see a world in which houses get flooded into the market. I think if anything, they get more controlled release, and there's just as much pent-up buying potential just waiting there for it. So I think there may be somewhat of a decline in housing prices, but if anything, I think it's more likely that we get sort of a stasis in the housing market, and everything else sort of grows up around it. That would be the optimal goal, I think. Bryce says this guy's a very good poster, so I'm going to follow him. All right, bet bonds. An idea whose time has come. This is a presentation at this Bitcoin Policy Institute conference from Andrew Hones. I've talked to you guys before about this conversation that Andrew Hones had on TFTC with Marty Bent. I linked it in the past. Very much worth talking about Bitcoin-backed loans. And there's also, shortly before this little 10-minute talk that Andrew Hones gave, there was a 30-minute talk by Michael Saylor, which I might play that tomorrow because he just really lays it out. But this is where things are going to start really getting interesting, because think about the government HELOC. Imagine incorporating Bitcoin into that in some degree. Think about these 50 to 100-year bonds. Imagine incorporating Bitcoin into that in some way. There's a lot of ways now that this administration, which has shown themselves to be very Bitcoin bullish, can start integrating Bitcoin into the debt structure of the United States, which is going to stabilize it tremendously because it's one of the best sources of collateral available, which is going to also stabilize the Bitcoin price a little bit, which is going to draw more capital into it. A lot of these trends are already underway, and a year from now, probably even less, people are going to be looking at Bitcoin in an entirely different way than they are right now. But here's where things could start getting really interesting as the administration, who is close with Michael Saylor and is very obviously deeply tapped into the Bitcoin world. So I would say I wouldn't be surprised if we get some sort of an innovative Bitcoin lending, the integrated Bitcoin lending structure here from the United States at some point within this next year.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. For our next keynote, I'm excited to introduce, I'll tell you the title of it first, Bit Bonds, an idea whose time has come. Welcome me and joining us, Andrew Hones of New Market Capital.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Andrew Hones. I'm the founder of New Market. We're a registered investment advisor specializing in structured credit. We've completed about $50 billion worth of notional risk transfer over the last several years with many of the world's largest banks. As respects Bitcoin, I'm also thrilled to have been the founder of Battery Finance in partnership with 1031, the largest Bitcoin-only venture firm in the world. And I'm also delighted to serve on the board of Fold. You may have seen recently we announced the completion of our first transaction blending Bitcoin with a traditionally financeable asset, which was a commercial real estate loan that we completed in Philadelphia and announced on CNBC some time ago. We have a deep pipeline of those types of investments, and we're actively working with pensions across the United States to assist them in, let's say, safeguarding their credit investments from the ravages of inflation.
That's a very interesting point there, because this is sort of the you might call it like hidden money to the majority of just your average like retail investor or someone who's not even really an investor. Some of these funds are extraordinarily massive, and to this point, and they're in a tough spot right now. To this point, they've been unwilling to get into the Bitcoin world, not because they don't necessarily believe in it, but because the regulatory structure doesn't exist. And it was obvious that the federal government was hostile to it. Now that that's been taken away, and it's now clear that there is a government that's favorable to it, that's going to dramatically increase people's willingness to actually begin engaging at this at the institutional level.
Today, however, I'm going to share a thought experiment related to the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve and the United States Treasury. In particular, we're going to talk about bit bonds, and our goal today is to think about how could we lower 10-year interest rates, build savings for American families, and at the same time, defease the national debt.
Interesting that he highlights lowering 10-year rates. This is a presentation designed for the administration. This is targeted at the administration. They've said, we want lower 10-year yields. Here's how you can do it.
These are three pretty big objectives, but I think that they're remarkably achievable when you begin to perceive the compound annual growth rates of Bitcoin. And in many ways, Michael's talk earlier today set the stage for this in a beautiful way. First of all, we have $9.3 trillion of federal debt that's coming due within the next 12 months. The interest rates on that debt have dramatically increased over the last 3 years, and refinancing it at today's interest rates will create an extremely profound burden on taxpayers. Secretary Bessent has indicated his strong desire to spread future Treasury issuances across the duration curve, avoiding the risk of putting everything in the short end of the curve, as Secretary Yellen did. President Trump and Secretary Bessent have also indicated their strong interest in lowering 10-year interest rates, which have an important effect on consumer finance, mortgage finance, auto loans, as well as the federal interest expense. President Trump created the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, and in particular directed the United States government to identify revenue-neutral ways to acquire Bitcoin. By creatively integrating Bitcoin into Treasury bonds, I would like to suggest that we can significantly reduce the borrowing costs of the federal government and defease the debt. And in particular, I'd like to propose that for Americans that purchase these bonds, that they be tax-free from both interest as well as capital gains, and offer a very strong way for American families to rebuild wealth. So what's the program? It's actually pretty straightforward. $2 trillion bond issuance, 10% of the bonds go for the purchase of Bitcoin, 90% go for other government purchases. Per $100, $10 buys Bitcoin. The interest rate on a current pay basis is much lower than the normal interest rate, only 1% per year. This dramatically reduces the current interest expense of the federal government. At the conclusion of the bond, in this case a 10-year bond, investors are due a compound annual growth rate of 4.5% on a senior basis. That's equivalent, roughly, to the 10-year interest rate on treasuries today. And after they receive 4.5% on a senior basis, they're entitled to 50% of the Bitcoin upside, and the United States government retains the other 50%.
Okay, so let me go through this. He just kind of went through that quickly. Let's go through this a little more slowly. So you do, and what they're suggesting is you do an initial total issuance of $2 trillion. So it says approximately 20% of the 2025 refinancing needs is met through bit bonds. So if you need to refinance, he says $9.3 trillion, then let's get 20% of that using bit bonds. So you issue these $2 trillion. Of that $2 trillion that comes in, $200 billion of it is used to buy Bitcoin. And the remaining $1.8 trillion is used to fund government operations. And then, so that it says satisfies funding needs for the government activities while adding Bitcoin to the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. The interest on it is 1% annually for 10 years, which is much lower. It says much lower current interest rate, principal repayment guaranteed by FFC, independent of Bitcoin price. The total return is 4.5% senior with 50% BTC upside. So upon maturity, investors receive 100% of the BTC upside up to a 4.5% total compounded return. So this is the assumption here is that 10 years from now, that Bitcoin is going to have appreciated in value. And so the investors will receive there's the 1% annual interest that they get, and then they will receive 4.5% of that, the equivalent of a 4.5% return out of that appreciation, and 50% of the remaining Bitcoin upside. So you put that $200 billion into the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, and then over the next 10 years, that $200 billion is worth of Bitcoin is appreciating, and then you take the equivalent to pay out that 4.5% rate at the end, plus the remaining, what would account for 50% of that Bitcoin upside. And then any remaining Bitcoin gains above the investor above the investor share are
50% of the Bitcoin
used to build the U.S. strategic Bitcoin reserve at no cost to the U.S. government. And Bryce says this in turn encourages people to buy BTC outside of bonds. Right.
What would this look like? Well, if it's a $2 trillion issuance right off the bat, that would mean $200 billion worth of Bitcoin purchased at $90,000 per Bitcoin. That's 2.22 million Bitcoin. Of course, the price will fluctuate and likely will acquire a different amount than that, but that's at $90,000. What would this look like in terms of savings? Well, the current U.S. 10-year rate is roughly 4.5%. And the proposed rate for the BIT bond is 1%, which is a 3.5% annual savings, or $70 billion on $2 trillion of total issuance. Over 10 years, that's $700 billion. On a present value basis, roughly $554 billion. If you consider the cost of acquiring the Bitcoin, which is $200 billion, that produces a net taxpayer savings on interest presently of $354 billion. In other words, the United States federal government could acquire $200 billion of Bitcoin and save $354 billion at the same time.
That point right there is very good. That's a key point here. That because of basically this is a bond issuance that is targeted at people who, number one, recognize the potential of Bitcoin and see the fact something like this that buyers who bought these bonds are going to make an extraordinary amount of money at the end of that 10 years. And so those who recognize it, they're willing to take only 1%. As opposed to whatever the 4.5% is, because they recognize the potential at the end. And from the perspective of the government, instead of issuing these bonds at 4.5%, when he does the math there, he's taking the difference that you're saving in that from the 4.5% to the 1%, and then there's the I can't remember the number he said, it was like $600 trillion or something, or $600 billion or something like that. You take that, you offset it with the cost of the money going into Bitcoin that they use to purchase Bitcoin and put it in the strategic reserve. And when you put those two together, on net, the taxpayer saves $300 and something billion compared to if they had just issued these bonds at a normal 4.5% rate.
Of course, this is just an illustration, but I think that it would be great if American families could also purchase these bonds in addition to institutional and foreign investors. Like Tether, we learned today that they have enormous holdings in United States treasuries. And institutional and foreign investors will be attracted to these bonds because they can serve as eligible collateral for a range of different swap and derivative arrangements. But for American families, I would like to propose that the BIT bonds be free of income tax and free of capital gains tax in order to put a tremendous tool for savings in the hands of everyday Americans. What would this look like? What could an American family expect to gain over the course of 10 years? Well, there are 138 million American families, and if they purchased 20% of this total issuance, that would be a $2,900 investment per family. What I've illustrated on the right are the 4-year compound annual growth rates for Bitcoin at the 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentile. And as you can see, at even the 10th percentile, the interest plus the Bitcoin upside on this bond would be $96.58 for a compound annual growth rate of just shy of 7%. And that's on a tax-free basis.
Just shy of 7% on a tax-free basis. And this is at the 10th percentile CAGR, the compound annual growth rate. And Bitcoin has been, someone in here, correct me if I'm wrong, the Bitcoin CAGR over its life cycle has been something like 60%. So the 10th percentile would be extraordinarily low.
Tax-exempt basis. At the 25th percentile, you're looking at 9.33%, and at the 50th percentile, you're looking at a tremendous return over a 10-year period, 17%. What would this look like for the government, for the United States of America? We would dramatically reduce 10-year interest rates. We've already discussed that. Significant savings, $554 billion present value savings. Substantially reduce dramatically reduce the interest rates from 4.5% to 1%. That can ripple through the rest of the Treasury market and reduce mortgage borrowing, reduce auto borrowing, reduce small business lending costs.
Oh! This has to happen. This absolutely has to happen. It is the perfect solution. Being able to suddenly issue bonds at 1% like this. Bryce says, are there any other countries doing this right now? Or are we first? No one's doing this right now. This does not exist. This is a proposal. A country is going to start doing this. It makes way too much sense. Why not us? We are perfectly positioned for this. You want to bankrupt Europe? You want to take the teeth out of their whole big capital raise scheme? Announce something like this. And having just ordinary citizens buying these creates such a virtuous loop. Shout out to Stormy Waters and Will Tanner. I finished that conversation yesterday. I linked it on yesterday's King Pilled Substack. Go listen to it, talking about McKinley's virtuous loop. This itself would be such a virtuous loop where you get Americans who are now directly investing in their government and the government needing the investment from their people.
Costs so many different advantages. Also substantially reduce the interest expense for the government. That's where the present value component comes in. Revenue neutral acquisition of an enormous amount of Bitcoin. And if you take a look at the CAGRs, and we have a symbolic one in there that I want to draw your attention to, but if you take a look at the 25th percentile compound annual growth rate, 37% per year, which, by the way, is exactly equal to Michael's bull case for Bitcoin in the year 2045 on a CAGR basis.
Just for context there, Michael Saylor, maintaining the 37% CAGR basis in 2045, his projection is that Bitcoin will be worth $13 million per Bitcoin. Each Bitcoin will be worth $13 million. So on that basis, which would be the 25th percentile outcome, look what the government upside is.
That produces a government upside in this structure, and I did not plan it this way. It just turned out this way. That produces a government upside in the structure of 1776, 1.7
USA
US dollars. That's after 10 years. As you extend this out to 20 years, in the year 2045, the compound annual growth rate of the 25th percentile, 36.62%, produces a government entitlement of Bitcoin that is slightly greater than $50.8 trillion, which is the expected size of the funded federal debt in the year 2045. In other words, with this plan, we're in a position to defease the federal debt. In summary.
Remember how Trump was, I played the clip from Trump yesterday where he said that, what did he say? He said, when interest rates are high, nobody can get rich because people can't borrow money. And he's thinking like he recognizes that the way to get rich is to use other people's money to generate something productively to repay them. So you're not using your own money. You're putting somebody else's money at risk, but you're a responsible steward of it. You generate something productive with it and you repay them. When interest rates are high, that's not possible. When interest rates are low, it becomes possible. Well, what happens when you integrate the most perfect form of collateral that has ever been created? You integrate that, and then you lend against it. When you have something like $900 trillion in total assets in the world, and probably half of that is ultimately going to get redenominated in Bitcoin because of its characteristics, I don't see how this presentation would not immediately have Trump jumping out of his seat as a politically Catholic says, "Oh, Canada, you're going to issue dollar bonds? Oh, Canada, you're going to issue dollar bonds? Well, I'll meet and raise your dollar bonds with Bit bonds." Indeed, this is so... I feel like this has to... There's no way this isn't coming. It makes way too much sense. We've already got Trump's sons who are Bitcoin bulls. We've got Lutnick, who's a massive Bitcoin bull. We've got Besant, who is a gold bug, who also seems to very much recognize the potential of Bitcoin. Has been spoken very favorably of it. I don't see how this doesn't happen. RFK is a huge Bitcoin bull. There's so much of it within the administration already. This makes way too much sense. And now that it's out there, like, our government needs to get on it before someone else does. Pleb Enforcement says it's very interesting that Pablo from Tether was at the White House for this crypto summit, but curiously absent from the roundtable. Tether own 100 billion in U.S. treasuries. The USG have 100K of their Bitcoin seized from a hack. I see a deal being cut around these coins that suits all parties. The fact that Tether just relocated to El Salvador, and Lutnick is a huge a Tether bull, and Tether is now minting new tethers on the Lightning Network. All of these things all coming together at the same time. I feel like you have to be a massive conspiracy theorist to say that this is just a coincidence.
Bitbonds are a win-win-win. We're looking at dramatically lower interest rates in the form of savings, $554 billion of present value savings. The upside that the government stands to generate is enormous, anywhere between $830 billion to over $300 trillion of upside from the 10th to 90th percentile of historic Bitcoin performance. The debt offset is significant at just the 25th percentile of performance. This is a plan that can defease the entire debt. The family wealth creation is remarkably powerful. This puts in the hands of everyday American families a tremendous tool to defend against inflation. And in summary, I would love to see this adopted by the Treasury and by Congress. So I thank you all for your time today, and I'm very grateful to Grant and David and Matt for putting on such a tremendous conference. Thank you all.
I'll find the link to the TFTC conversation with Andrew Holmes where he talked about more of these Bitcoin lending products. I'll put that link in the. Actually, let me just try to pull it up here real quick, and so I don't forget, and I have it in the right spot. So you can go to the King Pilled Substack after the show is done, and get some of this good stuff for yourself. Of course, now YouTube won't open. There we go. History. Hones. He's very. He was a little dry in this. This presentation here. He's very compelling on the full conversation. Title of it is Andrew Hones, Your Bitcoin is Worth More Than You Think, New Collateral Method. In this groundbreaking episode, former Wall Street veteran Andrew Hones explains how Bitcoin is revolutionizing traditional banking through innovative collateral and loan structures. And at different points, he kind of, you see the autism kick in, and he starts rattling off all the different potential use cases for integrating Bitcoin mining into various different aspects of energy and infrastructure and everything else. And it'll if you haven't thought about this at all, it's gonna rock your world. Okay, so I've got that link in there. That'll be on the King Pilled Substack. So let's talk about this. I've got about another half hour or so. So let us talk about this the Sam Seder thing. I've never listened to Sam Seder before. Never found him worthwhile to the point where I didn't even recognize him. I didn't even know his name. I knew obviously I know Hassan, Vosh, what's his name? I can see his face, little Weasley looking guy, David Pakman. I was aware of them. I'd heard of Sam Seder, never actually listened to him. And then this tweet came across my timeline from the Royal Surf. Says simply, Patriot. And here we have a young woman just absolutely dragging Sam Seder. And all he can do is just do the splutter and point thing. The reason I want to highlight this is because we're seeing the younger generations. Remember all the polls that indicated that that Trump's popularity with Zoomers is on the rise? Everyone was worried the Zoomers were going to be just going to continue this degenerate spiral into total postmodern degeneracy and everything. Well, it turns out that the fourth turning is being validated tremendously. And the Zoomers are, they're actually going to be a much more conservative reactionary force than the previous generations. And you're seeing that, and I'm going to play 2 clips here. One of them with this chick and another one with a debate bro.
What's the problem with xenophobic nationalism? Don't you think that's better for Americans in general?
To be xenophobic nationalism is better?
We should have a coherent culture. Everyone should be a part of the same culture. We should have assimilation.
Which, do you get to choose what the culture is?
We already have a dominant culture.
What is
based
the dominant
on
culture?
European and Christian values and identity. That is the dominant culture.
White, Christian,
it's rooted in European identity.
White, so your argument...
Notice that she didn't say white at first. She just said European and Christian, and then he's the one who inserted white into the conversation.
Is
that has been the dominant culture.
Just to be
and
clear,
we're not letting people assimilate to that. We're saying you should keep your culture, and this is why our culture is so divided.
Your argument is that Trump is good for those who want a dominant white European culture.
I mean, that is what America is. It's rooted in European identity and Christian values. That's what it has been. Would you really disagree with that? What is it then, if that's not the identity of America?
Well, I think the identity of America...
For the majority of time, America's been a country. You don't think that's been the identity?
Well, actually, no. I think actually the identity of America has been, for better or for worse, a melting pot in that.
Melting pot.
Yeah, maybe since like the 1960s. Even then, even we had this idea of a melting pot literally means assimilation too. It means melting. It means you're assimilating to the dominant culture. Is that not what melting means?
No, it doesn't
mean. And now
you're
instead we're saying there's something wrong with xenophobia.
Culture. No, I mean, look, I got to be honest with you. You and I have a fundamental disagreement. We will never see eye to eye on this. It's a choice, and people. I think what you're expressing though is really what the Trump movement at its heart is about. And I think that's problematic.
I disagree. I don't think Trump's
it's problematic. Oh, okay. Let's just not have a country then. Let's just get rid of our borders because it's problematic. This is actually a sign of the vibe shift that they are simply conceding now. They do their little snarky well, I think that's actually, I think this is actually what the Trump movement is all about, is white nationalism. And she's like, yeah, that's right. Actually, she says, she goes, Trump isn't even radical enough for me.
Like anywhere close to being a Christian nationalist. That's ridiculous. Like Trump's basically a Democrat from like 15 years ago when it comes to social
So you don't think that he's conservative enough for you?
Oh, definitely. Nowhere.
He's not xenophobic enough for you?
No, he's trying to import a bunch of H-1Bs. Are you kidding?
So you want to get them out too? Yeah. No, I think you're making...
Look at the energy just fall out of him.
Phobic enough for you?
No, he's trying to import a bunch of H-1Bs. Are you kidding?
Right. Oh, so you want to get them out too? Yeah.
You want to get them out?
No, I think you're making my argument for me.
Straight buster. America should be xenophobic and nationalistic, actually. Yes. We can just say things now. He's getting completely bodied by a blonde chick with kind of funny looking eyes. Just dragged by a woman. Woman's got a stiffer spine than that slimy little fellow. Now here's another one. It's very interesting seeing that I've had my time listening to all the debates and everything, and it's not really my thing anymore. The blood sports thing and all that. I don't begrudge the people who are into it, but it's not my thing. But it's very interesting seeing the clips that are coming out from this show here. And I don't know if this is like a thing that's being chosen intentionally by the producers, but all of the pro-Trump people look, they're women, they're minorities, they're very. I don't want to be degrading to them, but they look very soft. They're very like kind of soft, sort of urbane personality. They give off that vibe, and yet this is not like 2017 TPUSA talking points. They're going pretty hard. This guy here, I'd never seen him before, but I've seen a couple videos now. I've got him into my algorithm. Easy debates. Says Christ is king. He's got the Orthodox cross. And he goes out and does. I've seen some of the videos. If he goes out and he does like just interviewing people on the street, debating them or whatever. Which again is not. It's not really my thing, but I can appreciate the people who do it. Indie coffee shop vibes. Yeah, they're all like people I would expect to see in a like a Southern California Starbucks or something like that. And yet they're arguing for xenophobia and nationalism. And I'm like, great, let's go. So this clip here is a little bit longer, but the guy's actually he's a skilled debater, and again just leaves Sam just kind of all he can do is really just kind of point and splutter.
Okay, so I would like to touch on the religious fundamentalist aspect. Yeah. Are you an atheist?
I'm a Reformed Jew. I don't have a strong belief in the existence of God, but I don't think that religion in and of itself is bad.
Okay, so what's wrong with religious fundamentalists? So like when you said trans rights and women's rights or something like that?
Well, the problem I have with religious fundamentalists, and really more, I guess it's really theocrats, is that they want to impose their morality that comes from their religion on the rest of us, and I don't.
But morality, from your view, is going to be a preference, right? It's not morality; it's a preference. So morality without a foundation is going to reduce you to a preference.
Well, I have a foundation for my morality.
Which is what?
It's a humanist vision of what basically creates as little suffering as possible for as many people.
Okay, so you're like a.
He asks him, what's the foundation for your morality? And he's like, oh, it's a humanist vision of what creates the least suffering. This is like philosophy 101 slop. And he's engaging in this debate, and the guy asks him, what's the foundation? I have a foundation for my morality. Okay, what is it? Like the humanist thing. They're not sending... No, actually, they are sending their best. This is their best. This is the best that they've got.
Consequentialist? Utilitarian?
He's throwing words at him he doesn't know.
Okay,
bother myself with being a consequentialist or a utilitarian.
It's always going to reduce you to a preference. So if you say that killing is wrong and I say it's right, you would really have no contention with that.
Well, no, I don't base my understanding of civil society on religion. And so we have a civil society. Okay. We have laws that we have decided as a society in a democratic way. And for some people, it's okay for it to be informed by their religion. That's okay.
Okay, perfect. So if tomorrow...
You know, every single one of the quote-unquote great thinkers from what this guy would consider to be his tradition would be utterly contemptuous of how vacuous and trite he is. Even trying to argue from his own position. It's boilerplate slogans. There's obviously zero philosophical depth to him. He's not a smart person. Very obviously completely astroturfed. Even his own, like Lenin would probably have him executed.
Tomorrow society comes together and we say, hey, trans folks don't deserve rights, you would be okay with that?
No, I would be against it, but I mean, it would be
morally right under your view.
Not morally right. No. I'm not talking about morals.
Okay,
here.
So here's where I'm getting to, right? Religious foundations provide an ethical framework for one to live their life off of.
I believe you can have an ethical framework without religion.
And if we take the leftist view to its logical tail end, to its extreme view, you have low reproductive birth rates. You have a reproductive dead end, so two men together can't reproduce unless they have to take from a healthy straight couple. Religion provides this foundation where you do prioritize the nuclear family.
So do you have a problem with gay people being married?
It's not that I have a problem. I just don't see a justification for why they ought to be gay outside of it just feels good. Can you give me another justification for it?
Well, I think maybe that's the way they were born.
Okay, what about pedophiles? Are they born that way?
They may be, yeah.
Okay, so should we let a pedophile off the hook since they were born that way?
No, I think we as a society has decided...
Should implement duties to prevent them from acting on that innate urge, correct?
He's just running circles around him. And this is, I mean, shout out to this guy. Like, he's doing great in a what's essentially kind of a hostile environment, but he's just playing with his food. And Seder has no idea where this is going. He's getting dragged along by his nose, and he's just dumbfounded at this. He's like, the trans people and the gay people, and he's like, okay, why should we have gay marriage? He's because they're born that way. They want to be. They're born that way. He's like, okay, so pedophiles were born that way. So it's like a very simple, a direct analogy that completely detonates the whole thing. But he's not even remotely prepared for it.
Well, I think between consenting adults, it's a different thing than...
Okay,
than
so you're okay with a
children.
45-year-old dad with a 19-year-old daughter as well? Incest.
No.
If they consent, you're okay with that?
No, I think society has also determined that it's like it's not beneficial.
Right, there's duties and obligations that we have, so religion provides those duties. Life isn't about
Well, but
freedom
also
and
I can-
exercise.
He'd led up to this with, if everyone decided that we were not going to accept trans people, then you would be okay with that, right? He's like, well, no. Society's consensus forming mechanism isn't fully reliable. Just because society develops a consensus around something doesn't mean it should be good. Okay, so how do you defend your position on this? Well, society has developed a consensus mechanism to that has determined that this stuff is where the lines are drawn. This is part of the reason why I've not really followed these sorts of debates anymore, because there is nobody coherent. You just end up having the same conversation over and over and over again, because there's not a single leftist out there that's coherent enough to actually engage in these sorts of conversations on any sort of level. So these conversations wind up kind of not really going anywhere, apart from being a performance to dunk on them for how retarded they are, which is great. Okay, it's good to see Sam Seder getting dunked on for being retarded, but that's not going to do anything to his audience, because his whole audience is all retarded as well.
What you want.
I mean, well, you want to impose your religious doctrine
No,
on me,
because
and I don't want that.
you just admitted we need duties. We have responsibility as a society to keep us functioning, to keep us thriving. Your leftist view, the liberal view, doesn't provide anything besides it just makes me feel good. Religion does. So what's your argument?
What's my argument as to why I don't want
you have no
your
contention.
religion to... Well, because first of all, I don't think that you have the right to corner what God is telling us is right or wrong. And there are differences between religions. And so my argument is, you're not...
This is actually, this point he's making is where, like, the guy he's debating over here, Easy Debates, when he's talking about religion, just sort of vague religion, I think he's doing it because he's kind of like, you don't want to get into where you're now starting to like try to debate with the Jewish atheist on various interdenominational or intra-Christian disputes, which kind of is, to me, is like the fact that you're inevitably going to wind up there. Like, you have to debate from a less solid ground. You have to just say religion in general. And grounding your civil society in religion is gay. Just religion in general. Okay, well, which religion? It is the natural follow-on from it. And now you're like, okay, we're going to have a multi-religious society and try to respect everyone's religions when ultimately this becomes necessarily zero-sum. So that's actually like an attack vector that he does pick up on, and he goes into, and ultimately... Like, I can understand from Easy Debate's perspective on this. Like, you're just gonna say religion because you're not, like, it would be pointless to have a debate otherwise. Which to me is kind of like it's pointless to have this debate in the first place. Come in there and straight up argue for Roman Catholicism or Presbyterianism or Islam or Orthodoxy. Like, pick your thing and plant your flag on it. And don't do this like we're going to start with religion and just talk about how good it is to have religion and that it's necessary and religion provides us this thing or that thing. Because Sam Seder himself has a religion. He is operating from a religious perspective whether or not he realizes it. His religion is just shitty. So arguing from the perspective of religion is where, if we could just say Trump isn't xenophobic and nationalist enough for me, but I like him as he is, then let's just go all the way and just say, we're not going to have like religion. We're going to have specific doctrinal prescription.
Not going to keep halal or kosher, right? I mean, I don't believe that someone has a corner on religious truth. And the reason why we have a democracy is because we didn't want a king. And the kings came from the idea that their God said that they're the ones who's supposed to be.
Reason we have a democracy? Well, wait a second. You just said a minute ago that if people democratically decided we're not going to have trans people anymore, that wouldn't be acceptable. So we have a democracy. We have our democracy because it's against the king. But when democracy gets it wrong, well, then we can't just have democracy. What do we need? we need unelected bureaucrats. The war against kingship is a war on God, directly, full stop. The conception of democracy as a political formula is an explicitly anti-Christian proposition. The only reason that it emerged was because of anti-Christ sentiment.
King. And so we can disagree on this. I don't want to live in a country that is ruled by religious fundamentalism.
And if I do, you have no issue with that.
And no. And this is why I say under Trump, yes, you have won.
Yes.
You have a
Only
bunch
male
of Christian.
and female. You're right.
You have won. He says this sort of, he had this sentiment a number of times where they're openly acknowledging that they are retreating and retrenching because they see that this sentiment is on the rise and is dominant and is much more popular than them. Of course, now this feeds into, they've spent all of this time while they thoroughly dominate the airwaves on every front. Every institution just parrots their bullshit propaganda back to them. They've sent here perpetuating this delusion that they have that, oh, we're the poor, cornered minority. So they're just going to continue doing that. Oh, we're nobody. We're the brave soldiers who are fighting the overwhelming powers of the billionaires and the corporations and yada yada yada. They're going to keep doing that. They never stopped, even when every single corporation was posting Pride Month horseshit. They still were like, oh, our poor little marginalized minorities. They're going to keep doing it. But they're now, there's a different tone to it now where they're like, well, yeah, you won. You guys won. So press the advantage. That's right. We won. Shut up. Get in your box.
You have a Christian nationalist,
Yes,
and
which is necessary.
And so I concede the point that under Trump, your Christian nationalism has gained an advantage under this.
Sorry, we're going to have more kids. We're going to have less abortions. We're going to have more family. We're going to have stable family households. Sorry about better education.
People, gay people should be outlawed.
They should be straight. They should be straight.
Women should be secondary to their husbands.
Women should submit to the husbands.
Women
that doesn't mean they are slaves.
Right,
it doesn't mean they are slaves. It means they are protected. Okay, let me ask you that. Let me ask you.
No.
Should women be drafted? Should women be drafted?
Listen, I think
if they're equal, should they be drafted?
I think this is the vision that you have.
He's not going to answer that question.
Supports it. I think the Christian nationalists he has throughout his government are all going to work towards your vision.
Yes.
And my hope is that when people look at this, they say, hey, wait a second. I don't want my life to be dictated by the notion of a Christian nationalist prescription. Now, you may win out. I mean, certainly, like if you look at a country like Iran, they have a theocracy there, and that. And apparently that's, good for them if they want it.
My final point is whenever
but I don't want to live in a theocracy.
My final point is whenever we see people live out Christian values to its full extent.
I don't want to live in a theocracy. Great, go. Go away. Go live somewhere where you can get what you want and let us have our country back. Hermethius says, democracy predates gay Christianity by thousands of years. Yeah, you know what precedes Christianity? You know what precedes democracy? God. And people have been warring against him for longer than quote unquote Christianity has existed. A response here from Vagrant of Rhodes. He says the left doesn't actually know anything. They just make up scary-sounding pseudo-academic terminologies to wish away normal behavior. Wanting a safe home is xenophobic. Wanting to maintain your town is problematic. Wanting a high-trust society is fascism, etc. We shouldn't take people like Seder seriously. He's a buffoonish character imitating a liberal picture of intellect, which just means asking absurd, reductive questions behind a smug facade of surface-deep, quizzical brow movements. They're totally empty. The NPC meme is real. All he does is criticize, yikes, I don't know about that. That's problematic. Don't you think that's racist? Sheesh, that sounds iffy. That's xenophobic. These are deeply unserious and unworthy people who somehow found themselves in total control of society. Stuttering his way through responses, he can't come up with any worldview or tangible argument other than you're bad and icky and I don't like you. The academic terminology is like camouflage designed to give a serious cell quizzical brow weight to this empty-headed buffoonery. The most glaring thing about this is how libs are so completely bereft of any substance whatsoever. These people are just sitting around complaining. They're beyond useless and have no clue how to deal with the right's recent awakening. Depth and belief actually scare them. They operate like a gaggle of crones, sniping from afar, never really engaging in conversation, just entertaining themselves and the rest of the clucking hens watching from afar, giggling from the corner and laughing at people in their private echo chambers later. Yawn. They have no real framework from which to understand normal people, and simply aren't capable of rationalizing behavior on their own without some hive mind third-party institution telling them what to think. If the New York Times came out and told them the sky is pink, they'd roll with it. The best solution is to laugh at these people for the clowns they are. We will never explain normal behavior to them because they see themselves as unique and special and ultimately superior to normal people. They hate everything normal people represent. It scares them. So they build this little pathetic wall of terminology to keep the normal at bay, convincing themselves that every weird lib fetish that they see in an Atlantic headline is the real normal, that jabbing yourself 10 times is normal, that a man in a dress is normal, etc. If you just stand up to them and say airdropping 20,000 foreigners into a small unsuspecting American town is ethnic cleansing, here's why, they really don't know how to respond. They just sputter until they can find some seals to clap for them and make them feel better. That's why they always go for formats where social shaming can be utilized. If they can just whip enough other libs into a dumb frenzy, then they can win the argument. It's how they won their revolution in the 60s, and it's how they've maintained control ever since. You can see this happening now with the way they're going after Tesla. It's really just go try to try to associate them with bad yucky thing. And then that makes them bad and yucky. If you just stand with courage, tell them and their fellow NPC crowds, this is what I believe, they fall into an impotent rage of confused and empty intellectualizations. They don't actually have a foundation to fall back on other than despising you. It's all they have. They hate everything normal people stand for and will never see eye to eye with us. It's better to just roll over them like the tide and bury them in their inevitable irrelevancy. Laugh at these pompous midwits and focus on fixing the country without them. And one of the most legendary tweets of all time from Mystery Grove, reminder, communism is when ugly, deformed freaks make it illegal to be normal, then rob and or kill all successful people out of petty resentment and cruelty. The ideology is all just window dressing. Another banger from Vagrant of Rhodes. Okay, I got 2 remaining things for you guys here. And then I got to jump. I see that Hermethius is in here spreading Talmudic propaganda. I don't have time for that right now. First, a reminder of why you need to get skronk.
The most interesting finding of the last decade in all of science. Your muscles are basically an endocrine organ that secrete hormones into your bloodstream that affect every system of your body. And from a health point of view, your muscles, they secrete chemicals and proteins when you exercise that are also really good for your brain health. That when you contract your muscles, they literally secrete these proteins into your bloodstream that make you resilient to stress and can protect you from depression. The scientists called them hope molecules. This idea that literally your muscles are manufacturing like antidepressant molecules. You have to contract your muscles. Like that's it. But your muscles it's like a pharmacy in your muscles. And anything you do that contracts them, walking, hiking, running, dancing, weightlifting, going to be dumping hope molecules. They work as an antidepressant and they also help people recover from trauma. That's like a miracle. course, it's wonderful when medications work for you, but for so many people, medications don't work or they don't do the full job. And the idea that your muscles could provide you with the equivalent of something like an antidepressant medication, like that is just, I think it's fun.
Had never thought about it that way, but that's going to change the way that I think about it going forward. Whenever I'm flexing my muscles, I'm squeezing hope molecules out into my bloodstream. And then the very last thing here. So Tucker, who's had some very interesting conversations lately, had Jonathan Rumi on, who is the actor who plays Jesus in The Chosen. I've watched a decent amount of The Chosen, and it's, yeah, obviously it's it became very clear that there's some issues. Maybe I'll do an episode talking about that at some point. But this conversation that he had with Jonathan Rumi was very good. I like Jonathan Rumi, and in particular this part. This is from Trad West. Says this was actually a great speech. Christ is king.
You're effectively living in hell on earth, which is what Nagasaki was after the dropping of the bomb. People were walking around asking for water while their skin is melting off, like it's literal hell on earth. So he gave a speech to his community. He was one of the very few survivors in his community. He said, "I have heard that the atom bomb was destined for another city. Heavy clouds rendered that target impossible, and the American crew headed for the secondary target, Nagasaki. Then, a mechanical problem arose, and the bomb was dropped further north than planned and burst right above the cathedral. It was not the American crew, I believe, who chose our suburb. God's providence chose Urakami, the suburb, and carried the bomb right above our homes. Is there not a profound relationship between the annihilation of Nagasaki and the end of the war? Was not Nagasaki the chosen victim, the lamb without blemish, slain as a whole burnt offering on an altar of sacrifice, atoning for the sins of all the nations during World War II? Happy are those who weep. They shall be comforted. We must walk the way of reparation, but we can turn our mind's eyes to Jesus, carrying his cross up the hill of Calvary. The Lord has given, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Let us be thankful that Nagasaki was chosen for the whole burnt sacrifice. Let us be thankful that through this sacrifice, peace was granted to the world and religious freedom to Japan." Well, is that not a profound perspective? That is the power of a relationship with Christ.
Something I learned not too long ago was that where the bomb was dropped was on, just so happens, isn't it strange that all of this, for the last, 80 years, something like that, it seems that whenever the United States gets itself involved in all of this foreign war adventurism, it just so happens that Christians wind up getting slaughtered. And that's what happened. The largest concentration of Christians in Japan was in Nagasaki, where the bomb was dropped. Kate says that was an amazing interview, definitely worth watching the whole thing. Agreed. All right, guys. Well, that's all I got for you today. Thank you for turning up for another episode of the Astrolab. We're at 100 likes. Thank you for getting us to 100. Hulk is warming up. If you could get us to 109 and then 110, that would be great. We still got 137 watching. Do me a favor and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Share the show. Go subscribe to the King Pilled Substack, kingpilled.substack.com. That's where I will get this episode posted here in a little bit. And you can go through all of the links that I went through today if you'd like to share them or watch them or listen to them or look at the replies or whatever you'd like to do. I'll have all of those in there. And then, lastly, join the King Pilled Discord, kingpilled.com. That's a place to be. And remember, drop an eggplant in the chat in honor of Trump's awareness, Trump-related ultramassive penis syndrome. Give me some Trumps. Give me some oinks in the chat for Pig Dirk. Give me some salutes. Throw up some Romans in the chat. I'll be back tomorrow. You can follow me on Twitter at RealKingPilled for any of my thoughts between now and the next Astrolab. But I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Astrolab. And for now, I give you Hulk.
When they took a shot at my hero,
and they tried to kill the next president of the United States. Enough was enough.